Ryu stared into the deep white fog for a long time, unable to calm his emotions. He had never met his great-grandfather before, but just seeing the Tatsuya name caused feelings he had been pressing down for too long to come bubbling up. The result was him doing something impulsive, but even if you asked him after he calmed him, he didn't regret it for even a moment. Primus Tatsuya, his father, Titus Tatsuya's grandfather, his grandfather, Saint Tatsuya's father, founder of the Tatsuya clan, conqueror of the fire dragon, legend of the Shrine Plain. What Ryu couldn't understand is why his great-grandpa would be here. From his cursory understanding, this so-called mercenary guild was likely created by great talents who hadn't bothered to build their own clans. As such, they needed a different method of gathering faith for themselves, an especially important commodity for those of their level. The issue was that Ryu's great-grandpa had the Tatsuya clan. Could this place really provide him something they couldn't have? And even if it could, why would his name have a 0 beside it? Even the second lowest number had several hundred under its charge. How could he possibly gather any faith if he had 0 members of his faction? Until Ryu came along. Ryu knew that, under normal circumstances, he wouldn't be able to join a Sky God's faction. In fact, he half expected to be rejected from his own ancestors' faction as well. But it was likely that Osiris made special provisions for descendants of the 13 Sky Gods, almost as though to confirm this. Direct descendant status confirmed. HM. The world all around could only be described as a land of fire. Arcs of molten lava shot into the air like rings of smoldering red gold. A man sat at the center of this carnage, seemingly completely oblivious to the danger. In fact, his red-black robes were somehow completely untouched. In mortal terms, the man seemed to be between 30 and 40 years old. His stature was large, even seated. He seemed to tower above those of average height. His fiery red hair danced like flames instead of strands, accentuating his sharp, handsome jawline. The man had just sensed something he shouldn't have. Someone joined his faction, but with the impossible standards he set, that much was impossible. If he recalled correctly, the only person in history to ever meet those standards was his grandson's kid, but he was unfortunately born with a false spiritual foundation. If Ryu could hear the man's thoughts, he would be shocked. From his understanding, Primus Tatsuya hadn't even paid their clan a visit in millions of years. How could he possibly know anything about a great-grandson that only lived for 1,000 years? Though, as he thought these thoughts, Primus' emotional state hardly shifted. In fact, it could be said he was indifferent, as though Ryu's unfortunate plight had nothing to do with him. Primus sent his mind into a conspicuous golden ring on his finger, looking up the information of his faction in an instant. Saintly Weapon Sky God Faction 1. Ryu Tatsuya Talent Designation, Subcommon Battle Prowess Designation, Black Status, Direct Descendant. Primus froze. Even if he only saw the name, he would have known immediately that it was his great-grandson. He didn't need to see his status. In all of existence, no one would dare to take the Tatsuya name without his acknowledgement. It was then that Primus' indifferent attitude cracked slightly. It was incredibly subtle. Nothing more than a calm glint in his once indifferent eyes, but it appeared nonetheless. It could be described as curiosity, subcommon. Black. Primus thought to himself, "It'll become a laughingstock having a descendant like this." It would have been fine if Ryu had the lesser descendant status. In fact, there were other sky gods with descendants who were lacking similarly. But direct descendant meant something completely different. It was impossible for Primus to divorce himself from Ryu. Still, Primus was curious. How was it that Ryu had made it this far? How could someone without cultivation pass the test? And how could a mortal survive for 900 million years? Primus opened Ryu's evaluation. What he saw confirmed, without a shadow of a doubt, that Ryu was the very great-grandson he was thinking of, though he found it odd that he didn't see Ryu's heavenly pupils noted. Did the lad figure a way to hide it? If Ryu saw this, he'd be shaking his head at the unfairness of it all. 80% of the sky gods must vote yes before they could see his information, huh? Well, luckily, Primus was only able to do this because Ryu joined his faction. Primus could easily block other sky gods from looking. In the end, Primus saw the dreaded false spiritual foundation once more. But when he looked toward Ryu's cultivation, he received another shock. Lower Kai refinement realm. Something's wrong. Even if he survived 900 million years, his cultivation shouldn't be so pitiful, right? The issue was that Primus could also see Ryu's basic information, including his age. This great-grandson of his that was born nearly a billion years ago was somehow only 18. What was going on? Still only Kai refinement at 18. That was slow too. It was impossible for Primus to think of a sky god's inheritance. There were simply no legacies that worked like the phoenix sky gods, and as far as he was aware, there was no sky god legacy possible to inherit without passing a trial requiring a certain level of cultivation to complete. In the end, Primus silently sent his mind back to his body. After his initial curiosity, he once more became indifferent. Family, love, compassion. When one had seen trillions of years, how much had they gone through? How many of their so-called family had long since died? How much love had they given out only for it to be severed? It was impossible to expect a sky god to still be tied down by worldly affairs. Ryu's mind left the dream world. After a few moments, he managed to calm himself, regaining his usual demeanor. He understood that there was nothing to be happy about. Experts who treated their descendants with love like his parents and grandparents did were incredibly rare, usually mostly out of necessity. Grand cultivators, especially at the sky god level, grew detached as a method to protect their state of mind. What would happen if you gained the ability to live trillions of years, but those you loved could never do the same? Why would anyone want to subject themselves to the pain of suffering such losses again and again? If it grew severe enough, such experiences could lead to an irreparable heart demon that would ensure that the expert never progressed in their cultivation again. Though they never talked about it, Ryu knew that his grandparents had had more than just one child in their lifetimes of several billion years. It was just that his parents happened to be the only two that survived as the most talented. As for his great-grandfather, the losses he had faced were likely several times more. This was something all those who stood at the top of the world faced. Ryu didn't expect his great-grandfather to suddenly swoop down and take him under his wing, treating him with love and affection. It was very possible that his great-grandfather didn't act as the Tatsuya clan was being destroyed precisely because he had no intention of entangling himself in such worldly affairs. If that was the case, he wasn't Ryu's ally, he was an enemy. Ryu's gaze grew colder. Ryu didn't need any more evidence. The fact that his great-grandfather hadn't contacted him immediately, despite the fact Ryu was certain he was already aware of his existence, was telling. With their connection through Osiris, it would have been as easy as breathing for him to do so. Primus Tatsuya wasn't someone Ryu could rely upon, but Ryu had every intention of milking his sky god title for all that it was worth. His usual disposition would have him rather die than accept the help of someone who cared so little for him. But Ryu wasn't in a position to act as he pleased. His great-grandfather had better hope that his loved ones survived, or else there'd come a day where he would grow powerful enough to force him to kneel before their graves for the rest of his life. Ryu slowly closed his eyes, only opening them back up once he had regained his calm. His injuries were still too severe to allow his emotions to grow so agitated. Ryu immediately threw himself into his training. Since his body was in no condition for battle, he would focus on comprehending new techniques. As of now, his repertoire of techniques was too shallow. In addition, with the vast improvement in his mental realm, Ryu believed that a leap in his Tatsuya saintly weapons was only a matter of time. Of course, all of the techniques he chose were from the Awoken Moon sect, until Ailsa explained to him how she planned on subduing the Zu ancestors. This was the best option he had available to him. If Ryu wanted spear, glaive, or halberd techniques, the Awoken Moon sect was likely one of his more terrible options among the Outer Ring's 27 Fifth Order sects. However, Ryu didn't join them for their techniques. He joined them for the sake of the moon realm. It was just unfortunate that going there would be so troublesome. As for how Ryu would train these techniques with an injured body, he had Zoo Palace to thank for that, since he could project his mind into it. He essentially had a private space where he could train at his leisure. The best part was that, since thinking speed was much faster than the body could react, the crystalline jade almost acted as a pseudo-time warp treasure, allowing Ryu to train faster than he otherwise would. This advantage didn't seem to extend to the dream world, Osiris. This was because the world had to sync the minds of countless individuals in order to function. For everyone's mind to be sent into the same artificial space, there had to be a so-called basic unit of conversion. Everyone was measured against this basic unit and scaled up depending on the strength of their true bodies. This was another reason why the evaluation was necessary. Still, as a fifth-order sect, the Awoken Moon sect did have a decent selection regardless, at least of black-grade techniques, that is. This aside, Ryu was still content with his choices. Breaking charge. This was a defensive-type technique that worked regardless of what weapon you used, or even if you were a weaponless specialist. It focused on stopping the momentum of your opponent's attack by targeting strategic weak points. It was usually avoided because a portion of the technique required tempering the eyes with special herbs in order to sharpen vision. But for obvious reasons, Ryu could skip this step. Though Ryu could often see the weaknesses of his opponents, he didn't always have the perfect method of abusing those weaknesses. Though breaking charge was a mere higher black-grade technique, it taught a set of foot and body techniques that greatly improved one's ability to receive and mitigate attack strength. Lined assault. This was a movement-type technique. Ironically enough, Ryu still felt that his common grade, gliding cloud steps, didn't need to be changed as of yet. This technique simply supplemented it well in Ryu's opinion. It focused on explosive straight-line speed, something. Gliding cloud steps, which focused on evasion and agility, was lacking in. This was a peak black-grade technique that focused on using the body like a bow. As such, training it required great flexibility and tendon strength. At just its first of 4 completion stages, it could increase peak speed by 50% in a line. At Great Circle of Perfection, there was a 4-fold increase. Curving arrow, a lower black-grade archery technique that allowed one to shoot a homing arrow within certain parameters. It could also be used to make one's arrow path more unpredictable. Monumental Pierce, a higher black-grade spear layering technique, used a combination of striking speed and feints to gather momentum and confuse the opponents. It gave the illusion of a layered strike rather than truly being one. Ronin's Final Stand, a lower earth-grade sword technique that Ryu planned to adapt for his glaive and halberd. It used a sturdy base and indomitable will to fuse Kai into a wind blade-like strike. Twin Titan Dance, a lower earth-grade dual battle axe-wielding technique. Ryu believed that if he ever mastered this technique with his halberd, even divine vessel experts would have to fear him. The final technique was a higher earth-grade technique. It was, interestingly, a puppeteering technique called demonic strings. It was broken into 2 important parts, one that increased one's resonance with their weapons, and another that allowed control of one's weapons without touch. Ryu stood on the 4th floor of the Zoo Palace. Having completed the palace in its entirety, all 4 floors were laid bare before Ryu. The first cultivation floor, the second core text floor, the third natural order floor, and finally, the 4th battle spirit floor. Ryu had already been to the 1st and 2nd floor. The 1st floor was a sea of cultivation techniques, filled with visualization projections, as well as a shelf filled with top-class cultivation techniques, no weaker than 5 stars. The 2nd floor was a massive library. According to Ryu's understanding, it housed the various battle, movement, defensive and mental techniques the Zoo clan had accumulated over the years. Unfortunately, since Ryu was in no position to pit his mental realm against that of the 4 Zoo ancestors, he no longer dared to enter that library, not until Ailsa was prepared anyway. The 3rd floor, though Ryu had never been, was a haven for comprehending natural orders. Its air had a similar but lesser effect as compared to Ryu's silver vein lilies, and it stored the comprehensions of various Zhu clan geniuses of the past. Ryu knew that this floor would be important to him, especially when it was time for him to plant his cosmic seeds. Considering the size of his spiritual foundation, he had to take advantage of it by comprehending as many natural orders as possible. But for now, Ryu wanted to focus on fine-tuning the techniques he had already chosen for himself while Ailsa slept. Even if he knew he could plant many cosmic seeds if they didn't flow together, and instead weaken each other, there was no point. So Ryu settled upon the fourth floor. As its name entailed, this floor allowed you to battle against various battle spirits to hone your skills. Ryu stood before a dark black gate. Unlike the other floors, this place looked nothing like a paradise, nor did it have the grandeur one had come to expect. It was filled with a dark black fog, and seemed more like an endless sea of black. Even the gate was almost invisible in such an environment. If it wasn't for its slight red tint, even with Ryu's eyes, he would have missed it. Without much hesitation, Ryu entered. His mind spun, his vision swimming, but soon it opened to a bland cube-shaped room, spanning about 10 meters in every direction. It seemed they were intent on ensuring Ryu couldn't simply run to gain victory. Even at his relatively low cultivation, 10 meters didn't mean much more than half a breath to him. An old man in gray robes appeared. He looked small and frail, but Ryu's pupils were much too sharp to miss his hidden aura. Ryu couldn't sense a cultivation, though, oddly enough, the old man scanned Ryu, seemingly a bit confused, but then went about his job without much thought. This is the battle spirit floor of the Zhu clan legacy, creation of the genius undefeated Zhu king. Ryu inwardly raised an eyebrow. Cultivation truly begins at the spiritual severing realm. The rites of the awakening realm are just a primer to the hardships you will suffer. As such, the lowest realm of the battle spirit floor is the spiritual severing realm. If you are not prepared, please turn back now. Seeing that Ryu said nothing, the old man continued. Each realm consisted of 10 challenges. For the first 9, you will battle spirits like me. For the final 10th, you will battle yourself. This is your final warning. Though it is possible to give up at any point you choose and return to your body, if you are too persistent, it isn't impossible for your mind to be destroyed. Of course, if you die here, you will not truly die. However, it is very possible for someone who has not cultivated for very long to lack the willpower necessary to reform their consciousness. After experiencing this pseudo-death once, I suggest that you not battle to death until you've at least completed your first immortal ring. Ryu pushed his fist to the palm of his hand, signifying that he was really. The old man inwardly shook his head. What a rude young man. Does he not think I'm worthy of a true bow? The Zhu clan is hopeless if this is all that remains of us. His impression of Ryu only became worse once he saw 2 glaives appear in his hand. It was to the point where he could no longer hide the disappointment on his face. Ryu, however, couldn't be bothered to care. Much like his great-grandfather, he had no feelings of goodwill toward the Zhu clan. In fact, he had far worse feelings for the Zhu clan in general, especially after they tried to kill him. He wanted to use them and their resources. Nothing more, nothing less. What this elder of theirs thought of him wasn't even on his list of priorities. Let's begin. In what should have been a luxurious suite, filled with velvet red and violet cloths and satin sheets, was instead filled with the horrible cries of pain and the pleas of mercy of a man who no longer had a will of his own. The velvet red and violet, overwhelmed by a bloody liquid scarlet, the satin sheets, marred by chunks of grotesque flesh, the luxurious suite, had become a torture chamber under the whim of a beauty. A whip cracked violently, followed by the undying screams of Edwin. The woman behind the whip had an expression so eerily calm that one might think they were crazy. How could she be the reason behind this bloody scene? It was impossible. She was too calm, too beautiful. She had a flawless caramel complexion, matched by rosy soft lips. Her figure was fiery, wrapped tightly by leather guards and belts. The only inkling of her enraged temper was the slight glint in her eyes. It had already been days since Commander Fidroha learned of Ryu's slap to her face. Since then, she hadn't tired in using her whip. Warriors on Edwin's level could take far more punishment. She didn't even feel the slightest bit guilty. She wanted to wring Ryu's neck, but she couldn't find him. So this was her best option to vent. "Commander, should we think of our next step?" Another of the cloaked figures stepped forward, finally deciding that it was time they did something other than torture Edwin. Commander Fidroha's wrist paused. The trembling Edwin collapsed to the ground, his raspy breaths the only legitimate sign that he was still alive. Though an expert on his level should be able to take this kind of punishment, it shouldn't be forgotten that his punisher was an entire realm above him. If the silent beauty hadn't chosen to hold back, Edwin would have long since been dead. And what should that next step be? Fidroha said casually. The cloaked figures sighed an inward breath of relief. At least their leader was willing to listen. The man who had spoken had chosen a good time. If he had dared to say some yesterday, he likely would have taken Edwin's place. It is still unknown whether this throne Ryu was in fact chosen by the fairy. But what we do know is that he took the common grade exam, not the black grade. In addition, considering his age, it would be impossible for him to reach the black grade. Even our shrine-playing geniuses aren't worthy of such prestige at such a young age. Are you suggesting that I let him go? Though her voice was calm, the cloaked man couldn't help but flinch. No, Commander. I only mean that he was an unlikely target to begin with. You know that Valor City lowers its standards based on the age of its honor card candidates. Normally, it's lowered to black grade, but because of the unique difficulty of the herbology exam, it's further lowered to the common grade. This was such an obscure rule that even Molly didn't mention it to Ryu. She also assumed that he would have to reach the black grade, which was why she informed Ryu as such. As for the association head, the only information Molly gave him was that Ryu wanted to attempt the exam, not the purpose for why he wanted to. As such, he never informed Ryu about it either. This beautiful coincidence resulted in a layer of protection even Ryu didn't know he had. Get to the point. This is all to say that the honor card isn't enough to suspect him. The fact he has high enough battle prowess to become a throne, even if it is of a middling fifth order sect, makes it even more unlikely. Also, the history of the Awoken Moon sect is quite complex. There's a reason it hasn't been destroyed, despite being affiliated with. I don't say this so that Commander will give up on him, but rather so that Commander knows that it isn't 100% necessary to make him an enemy. Fidroha narrowed her eyes. See, Commander, Throne Ryu was definitely chosen by the Mercenary Guild. You know as well as I what this means. If he is so lucky as to be accepted into a Sky God's faction, we can't touch him. It finally became clear why the cloaked man said so many seemingly unnecessary words. It was to essentially talk Fidroha down from a ledge. The likelihood of Ryu entering the faction of a Sky God was incredibly small. However, even if he was just a factionless star mercenary, that alone would make matters far more complicated. For someone as powerful as Fidroha to be working with her face hidden, and even having her subordinates address her by Commander instead of her true title, it was obvious that they weren't in a position to reveal their actions so openly. As for why that was, maybe only a select few knew, but it didn't matter. The point was that provoking a large organization like the Mercenary Guild wasn't exactly in their best interest. Both organizations had similar goals, yet had yet to take action to eradicate the other. It was clear that this was because they had apprehensions about each other. No matter how powerful Fidroha was on the pedestal plane, it was nowhere near her turn yet to rush the actions of Sky Gods. Still, Commander, even if we cannot kill him directly, and even if he isn't a fairy's life partner, he has slighted Commander, and that is more than enough reason for him to die. Because we've hidden our identities, we are well within our rights to deny any involvement even if they are certain that we are involved. Even if he was chosen by a Sky God, as long as we're careful to not leave any obvious strings attached, no Sky God will go out of their way for the sake of a mere Kai refinement expert. Fidroha lowered her whip, What are you suggesting? You know that our original mission was to prepare for the Ice Devil Legacy World Selection. We were only diverted to this place after the matters surrounding the fairies' small world. But with this, we can kill two birds with one stone. Commander's clan has the right to appoint 3 seated geniuses, correct? However, there are only 2 direct line geniuses of appropriate age, Commander's little brother and Commander's little nephew. Originally, Commander's clan planned on using a filler for this 3rd position. Why not use it for revenge instead? This could also be the perfect way to lure the fairy's owner out of hiding as well. Fidro has stayed silent for a long time before responding. I'm listening. The old gray-robed man of the 4th floor felt his eyes tremble for the 12th time as Ryu's incorporeal projection reformed, slowly becoming more lifelike. It should have been impossible. First, Ryu defeated the first 2 of his forms. The thought of a Kai refinement expert defeating him as a spiritual severing realm expert was enough to make him lose all face. But that wasn't what shocked him. After defeating him twice with his odd dual polearm wielding style, it became clear to the old man that Ryu was simply testing out these techniques. If that was all, maybe it would be fine. But he went so far in his testing that he allowed to happen exactly what the man had warned him against. To now, on this 3rd of 9 forms, Ryu had died over 10 times. Any other Kai refinement expert would have collapsed after experiencing death. Yet Ryu seemed completely unfazed, continuing to recollect his consciousness time and time again. Ryu found this 4th floor to be more amazing than he could have ever imagined. Here, not only did his body not feel any fatigue, he didn't become injured either, not in any true sense. The only real exchange he had to make was with his focus Kai. The longer he fought, the more his mind seemed drained. But the 4th floor also seemed to have the ability to more quickly replenish focus Kai as well. As far as Ryu could tell, sleeping here for an half hour was the equivalent of 8 in the real world. Ryu wasn't at the point yet where he could go without sleep entirely. But as a Kai refinement expert, staying up for several days wasn't much of a problem, and when he did need to sleep, about 4 to 5 hours was more than enough. Of course, because the training was so intensive, Ryu's focus Kai drained much quicker. As such, he felt tired after just a few hours. This problem was magnified many times after a death, because reforming his consciousness seemed to take everything out of him. Still, with just a quarter hour of sleep, he was back and ready to battle. Even with all of this said, Ryu didn't believe this was the best aspect of the 4th floor. Nothing was better than the reward for defeating a stage. After Ryu's 2 previous victories, he felt a flood of information enter his mind. This wasn't novel information per se. Rather, it was a collection of data about himself. Everything from the techniques he used to his tendencies in battle all entered his mind, as though he was being instructed by a master. Essentially, the reward for victory was a perfect understanding of yourself and a path toward improvement. As a cultist fairy, there was no one better than Ailsa at setting a path for Ryu's future. However, that was only in terms of raw strength and cultivation. When it came to comprehending his own battle prowess, especially techniques, it was mostly up to Ryu himself. Ryu had entered the 4th floor having reached small success in all of his chosen black-grade techniques and an entry-level mastery of his chosen earth-grade techniques. Aside from this, he also had a small success understanding of the Awoken Moon Sex Legacy technique, White Serpent's Dance, Monumental Pierce and Breaking. Charge reached the great success level instantly. Lined Assault also reached the large success level. As for Curving Arrow, because Ryu hadn't used it during the first battle, it remained at the small success level. Monumental Pierce and Breaking Charge both entered the circle of perfection. It was then Ryu realized that the benefits from the rewards were meant to be digested over a long period of time. However, because he entered the second battle so quickly, its full benefits hadn't been seen. This only became more obvious after Lined Assault reached the great success level as well. However, judging by the surprise of the gray-robed man, Ryu realized that the fruits of his rewards were seen far too quickly. He immediately understood that he had the origin flame to thank for this. The stream of information that entered his mind was like a massive hub of data. The mind of a Kai refinement expert, and even a spiritual severing expert, wasn't meant to compute so many things at once. But thanks to the origin flame's perfect recall, Ryu didn't need to sift through and comprehend everything individually. The moment it entered his mind, it was destined to never leave. As a result, his benefits were near immediate. It had to be said that the Zhu clan's crystalline jade was truly a treasure, even for a Kai refinement expert. It wasn't an easy task to reach the circle of perfection in a peak common grade technique. Yet, Ryu had done so with just a few days of work with 2 higher black grade techniques. Seeing the benefits of the 4th floor, Ryu immediately threw his black grade techniques to the side and attempted to win the second battle with his earth grade techniques. It was then he realized something magical. The trials of the 4th floor, they weren't meant to only be taken once. If Ryu wanted, he could go back and retake the very first one and receive the very same rewards for winning. If this was true, then what was the point in continuing at all? The secret to this answer lied in how perfect and how helpful the information you received at the end of a trial was. When Ryu won his second battle, he realized that he gained greatly, but not as much as he did for the first trial. This wasn't because the second trial rewards were worse, but was rather because Ryu was using earth-grade techniques. How could a trial meant for spiritual severing realm experts be helpful in comprehending earth-grade techniques? It had to be remembered that only divine vessel and connecting heaven realm experts could bring out the true strength of such a high-grade technique. It was then Ryu completely understood. The first trial was most effective for black-grade techniques. In fact, it was meant to aid Zhu clan descendants in quickly comprehending lower black-grade techniques. It was a combination of Ryu's own high comprehension and the origin flame that made it so effective for the higher and peak black-grade techniques he used them for. The fact that Ryu got even an inkling of improvement in his earth-grade techniques was a testament to how high his comprehension skills were. By Ryu's calculations, if he wanted to quickly improve in his earth-grade techniques, after taking into account the origin flame and his own innate talent, he would need to defeat the 5th trial. However, after this list of benefits, fate wouldn't feel right with itself if it didn't snub Ryu in some fashion. Despite his comprehension skills being exceedingly beyond normal standards, Ryu simply didn't have the battle prowess necessary to cross even the 3rd trial, let alone to make it to the 5th. The standards of the Zhu clan and their era was obviously far higher than the mere 9th Order sect throne trial Ryu took. The fact he even passed the 1st trial was a testament to his own improvement after returning from Flash Mountain. To make matters worse, Ryu had to use the techniques he wanted to improve and to win, meaning simply relying on his speed or finding another roundabout method of victory would only be hurting himself. It was impossible for the 4th floor to collect the necessary data on him if he didn't show his use of the technique. Right, so here Ryu was, dying again and again to the very same old man. Though all of his black-grade techniques reached the circle of perfection, he simply didn't seem satisfied. Maybe if he used focus, the old man felt that this was too ridiculous. When did their Zhu clan gain such a masochist? It was then Ryu's image fizzled out of the jade. He hadn't given up. Rather, someone had called him. Ryu's mind re-entered his body. To the outside world, he seemed to be silently meditating. And since the crystalline jade was within his pupil's inner world, he didn't have to bring it out to enter either. No one would ever guess the kind of benefits he had just gained. I need a bit to fuse what my mind understands with my body, but it shouldn't take more than a few moments. Ryu's gaze turned to the once sleeping Ailsa. It seemed she had woken him up. When his senses turned toward the entrance of his ice cave, he realized that it was because Granny Miriam's younger sister Melody had come. Reaching the entrance and activating the formation mechanism to slide the ice stone slab open, Ryu greeted Melody and allowed her to enter. Seeing the panicked look in her eye, he understood that she must have heard what happened. "Are you all right?" "I'm just fine," After a few more days, it'll be like nothing happened at all. Don't worry about it, Melody frowned. I warned you about this. Being associated with our awoken moon sect will only bring trouble to you. Although they don't dare to act against us directly for fear of the faith we once held, you are a throne, and as such, aren't protected by that faith. You have to be more careful. Ryu's brows raised. It seemed Melody thought the attack the cloaked figure levied upon him were related to the enemies of his Tatsuya clan and their subordinate clans. He smiled inwardly. He wondered what Melody would think if she knew this would be his fight regardless of whether he joined the Awoken Moon sect or not. Still, Ryu was fairly certain the cloaked figures weren't actually of that purpose. Or maybe they were, but at the very least, it wasn't their only purpose. This event was more likely related to the matters surrounding Ailsa and her existence. Take this seriously. Melody's frown deepened, seeing Ryu's expression completely unchanged. I can't be absolutely certain, but they match the description of an incredibly prosperous organization. I have no idea why they're hiding their identities, but that only makes it more certain they're up to no good. Likely because they don't want information about the fairy small world to leak. Ryu thought to himself. He realized a few days ago that maybe the martial gods weren't the only ones who wanted a piece of his shrine realm. In that case, even the so-called martial gods had to watch their step, lest they repeat the mistakes of the Tatsuya clan. This thought only clicked more firmly after the steward's explanation. What if our guild receives a mission to a small realm where entry is restricted by cultivation realm? Those had been his exact words. It couldn't have been more obvious even if they hit him over the head with it. I understand, thank you for the warning. I won't let them get the best of me. Melody's shoulders fell in defeat. She was known as a cold, unapproachable beauty to many, but before Ryu, she felt as hot as a summer's day. Did he have any emotions besides indifference? No. I saw a different emotion on him before. Was it anger? Melody thought back to Ryu's throne trial, wondering just what he could have been so angry about then. Shaking her head, Melody got to the point. I didn't come to only check on you. There are now matters coming in the future that are likely directly tied to this. Is that so? Yes, Melody nodded. It was just announced today. The selections of the Ice Devil Legacy World will now provide a seeded reward. Seeded? Yes. Before, our pedestal plane wasn't worthy of such a thing. We were essentially going to be used as the cannon fodder and meat shields for Blossom Plane geniuses. In fact, the truth of the matter is that, although the Legacy World is located on the Blossom Plane, even Martial Plane youths are interested in it. Those Martial Plane youths make up the bulk of the seeded geniuses. A select few of the Blossom Plane are within these ranks as well. And finally, our pedestal plane will be allocated just one. Ryu sneered inwardly, immediately understanding. They want to lure me out. What an obvious ploy. What's the benefit of being a seeded genius? Are we not all entering the same legacy world? Such matters had always been every man and woman for themselves. And also, why would Martial Plane geniuses be interested in a Blossom Plane legacy? Melody blinked. Could Ryu have experiencing entering legacy worlds? Legacy worlds were incredibly rare things. To begin, one had to be a certain level of expert to even think of forming one after your death. Such experts were incredibly rare and didn't often die, meaning there might only be a handful of legacy worlds to open per generation. Legacy worlds that were overlooked and only found a long time later were rare exceptions. This would only happen if an expert sent their legacy world to lower realm, for whatever reason they might have to do so. Melody shook herself from her thoughts. Being a seeded genius has its advantages. For one, earlier entrance once the legacy world enters. For such things, the order of entering is incredibly important. In addition, during a time one might vie for treasures, being seeded also gives priority. Seeded geniuses gain a percentage of the treasures found by individuals under their charge. Seeded geniuses also don't have to fight in the final tournament, used to decide who gains entry. There are many other things that I'm not privy to knowing as well. Ryu's internal sneer only deepened. Who had ever heard of something ridiculous? No one owned a legacy world, so what gave them the right to take shares found by others? At the very least, if you were going to do so, don't shamelessly try to play it off as though you were working within proper protocol. Snatch it boldly and face the consequences. Martial gods indeed. These bastards were nothing but spineless cowards. Ryu felt his blood boil. These were the people his Tatsuya clan lost to. He would wipe this humiliation clean. As for your second question, why martial plane geniuses would be interested, that's related to an open secret of the Ice Devil legacy world. No one has ever heard of this Ice Devil before, but an expert capable of forming such a powerful legacy world couldn't possibly be unknown. Therefore, many believe this legacy world is either from an unknown realm or that it's among the rare few never discovered. The rare few never discovered, Ryu muttered to himself. In truth, Ryu knew that one of the most important things to him in the coming future would be the legacies he had under his control. The good news was that there were many hidden legacies within his bloodline that he could slowly come to understand. However, the bad news was twofold. Firstly, as a human attempting to comprehend a beast bloodline, the threshold he needed to cross was much higher. It was for this same reason the little rock, despite only have a wisp of ancestral rock blood, still exuded a fiercer aura than Ryu, who had 4 complete ancestral bloodlines. Secondly, even if he managed to communicate with these legacies, comprehending them was another matter entirely. If he had the comprehensions of his ancestors, it would be one thing. But currently, Ryu was alone, which meant he would have to relearn everything by himself. Of course, Ryu felt there was a small bit of hope in this matter for 2 reasons. According to Mona Lisa's understanding of the Shrine Realm's current events, the martial plane was actually the original Shrine plane, just renamed. Apparently, a large portion of the plane had been sealed off by Ryu's mother, Himari. And the second light of hope was that Ryu had reincarnated with everything in his pupil's inner world, meaning he had his clan's 4 emblems, used to access their holy lands with him. Maybe when Ryu grew in strength enough, he could bypass his mother's seal and benefit from the holy lands of the Phoenix, Tatsuya, and Kunnin clans. This was all to say that the current Ryu, even if he didn't trust how useful this Ice Devil might be to him, couldn't ignore the opportunity it presented. A cultivator's 2 foremost greatest strengths were their comprehension of the natural order and their actual cultivation. However, in close proximity at third place was the techniques and legacies they had available to them. To the current Ryu, an ice legacy would be greatly beneficial, as the awoken moon sect was too weak and couldn't provide to him anything better than an earth-grade technique. So what do I have to do? Ryu asked, looking up from his thoughts. What do you have to do? Nothing, Melody said in exasperation. I didn't come here to tell you about this so that you would participate. I came here because I knew I couldn't hide this news from you anyway. I wanted to be the first to tell you so that I could also tell you to not go. Oh, Melody had never been so frustrated in her life. Was this the response of someone to another who clearly cared about their safety? Impossible. Ryu replied plainly. I will participate. Melody nearly pulled her hair out. She had displayed more emotion in the past few weeks of knowing Ryu than maybe she had in her whole life. You don't understand. This isn't a selection for those of your cultivation. Those your age aren't even qualified to pass a preliminary round, as many of them are still pulse-opening experts. The minimum cultivation you need is of at least the higher spiritual severing realm, and even that won't be good enough in the long run, especially when those of the inner ring and core region begin to participate. You're very talented, but it's too early for you. It's not a problem, it'll just break through to the middle Kai refinement realm. Melody's brow twitched. What did you just say? She lost her temper, involuntarily leaking some of her aura. The space around her quaked, not because her strength was so great, but because it seemed to have a great affinity for her. No, that's not Space Kai, it's something different. But what is it? Ryu was more familiar with Space Kai than practically anyone. His adoptive big sister and death guard Nuri was half elemental sprite. Usually, elemental sprites were ranked below the top-tier fairies, but there were always exceptions to rules. In this case, Nuri was the exception. One of her parents had been from the exceptionally rare envies fairies. This race had deft control of space and the capability to manipulate it to their wills. If Ryu remembered correctly, Nuri once told him she had incredible difficulty cultivating when she was younger because of this. It seemed envies fairies cultivated differently from others, or maybe all fairies did. This was because, unlike humans, their Kai affinity was the only Kai they could cultivate. Either way, Ryu knew that this fluctuation in Kai definitely wasn't evidence of a rare space affinity. I said I would just break through. Ryu replied as though he couldn't tell Melody had asked a rhetorical question only to point out the ridiculous nature of his words. Do you think cultivation breakthroughs just fall out of the sky? If you rush it, you could cause irreparable harm to yourself. Ryu was slowly beginning to understand why it was Melody was acting like this. She had so suddenly gained all of Granny Miriam's care for him due to their shared bone structure. But her personality wasn't as gentle as her elder sister's. In the end, the clash resulted in this. Still, Ryu wasn't joking. If he did nothing but cultivate, he estimated he could clear a cultivation stage every 2 to 3 weeks, at least within the Kai refinement realm, anyway. The only reason he hadn't was because he knew there was more to cultivation than just a higher realm. Plus, he needed to focus on his weaknesses first, but now seemed as good a time as any. It would probably only take him a few days to break through now, since he had already accumulated so much momentum within the lower Kai refinement realm. You'll be going with me, right? You seem to have entered the peak spiritual severing realm recently, and you're not too old. Too many emotions bombarded Melody at once. First, she was shocked that Ryu could see through her cultivation, when even some of their elders couldn't. Second, she was enraged by the fact he simply ignored her words and acted as if he had already decided for her. And finally, she nearly passed out after he mentioned her age. Didn't he have a mother? What did she teach him? Wherever she was, Himari was probably sighing in defeat, while Elena was likely laughing out loud, happy to see someone suffer through a small percent of what she had to while courting Ryu. Gritting her teeth, Melody felt resigned to her defeat. Ryu saw Melody out after receiving the details of what would occur in the coming days. The selections would be held in a small realm owned by a Blossom Plain clan known as the Beauty Clan. It hardly needed to be said that they were quite powerful, controlling a territory of their own within this higher plains core region. However, as one might expect, such an esteemed Ninth Order clan wouldn't simply allow just anyone to enter their small realm. This left the pedestal plane with no choice but to hold selections of their own. According to reports, the martial gods had sent delegates to the pedestal plane to oversee this selection under the guise of preventing any nepotism that might occur. This truth filled many of the youths located on this lowest immortal plane with excitement, who didn't know the heralds of the martial gods, the mighty apostles. If one wanted to be known as a foolish dreamer, there was no quicker way than admitting a hope of one day too becoming an apostle. Their statuses were so lofty that even the geniuses of the Blossom Plain would get laughed out of any gathering should they dare to admit to having such a dream, let alone those of the pedestal plane. Of course, Ryu hardly cared about such things. He looked upon the martial gods with disdain for their shameless actions and rage for their audacity in laying a hand on his family. Why would he care about their mere messengers? Still, Ryu found all of these events much too odd. The so-called martial gods were putting in so much effort to ingratiate geniuses of lower planes. Could this all really just be to act as cannon fodder? Was this Ice Devil Legacy world really worth so much? The series of events seemed jumbled and fragmented. Even Ryu couldn't connect them in any coherent sense. And also, just who were the martial gods? Ryu was very familiar with the topmost realms throughout the cosmos, but he had never heard the title martial god before. Abyssal Vortex Kai, expanding the miniature dantions of Six Realm Opening, and compressing his Kai further with Revolution's amplifier. His skin glowed, breathing along with his expanding lungs, allowing his meridians to greedily expand. while others could only complete 13 total revolutions before entering the half-step spiritual severing realm. Ryu could complete 20. He had to complete 2 great circle revolutions, which left 18 others within the Kai refinement realm. He had already completed 4, 3 in order to satiate his first pulse, and 1 more to officially enter the Kai refinement realm. Before Ryu had even completed his first revolution, he had the Kai density of someone who had completed 2. After completing 4, he was mistaken for a higher Kai refinement expert by those of lesser experience. But now, charging toward the middle Kai refinement realm and completing his 5th, 6th, and 7th revolutions, it would be difficult to not mistake him for a half-step spiritual severing expert. With each successive revolution, the task of purifying and compressing one's Kai grew more difficult. This was especially so for Ryu, who was completing 3 revolutions per individual pulse. Yet from the looks of it, it truly didn't seem as though he was struggling at all. If the ice jade crystal body and chaotic silk meridians ran into a roadblock so early in cultivation, they wouldn't deserve the title of ancestral grade. In just 3 days, Ryu entered the middle Kai refinement realm. He opened his 3rd miniature dantian within his 3rd pulse, completed 37 more vortexes, and concluded 3 revolutions all at once. He felt his meridians thrum, a delicate wave of energy filling his body with vitality. It wasn't as exaggerated as the rebirth experienced when crossing a large realm barrier, but it wasn't a meaningless division either. Ryu felt some of the pain toward his back alleviate further. I have about 60% of my strength, not as bad as it could be. Just saying these words to himself, Ryu felt the hidden rage he had pressed down creep back upward, but he forcibly pressed it down once more. The next coming events would be a great hassle, a long string of scheduled tournaments standing in its wake. Luckily, as a throne, Ryu had no need to participate in Valor City's tournament and could directly enter the Major City's tournament. Following this, he would be allowed to challenge the Inner Ring geniuses before finally challenging the Core Region's geniuses. Still, Ryu felt like this was all beneath him. Instead of taking so many tedious steps, he would directly leap over them all. In addition, with his mind so focused on the Moon World, which he would have an opportunity to enter in just 2 years, he didn't even know if he would be back in time to enter this Ice Devil Legacy world. Ryu shook his head. I should track down the first necromancy ruin. Place your anger down. If I make it back in time, then I do. If I don't make it back, then I won't. Ryu decided that these tournaments were a waste of his time. With killing being prohibited, they wouldn't even be able to sharpen his skills. Instead, he would carve his own path. Once he was finished, he would head to the Core region and participate in their tournament as a wild card candidate. That way, he wouldn't have to suffer through such nonsense. Ryu suddenly thought of Melody and frowned, hesitating. He felt that he shouldn't allow her to enter the Beauty Clan's small realm alone. He owed Granny Miriam too much to allow her sister to take such a risk. It was then Ryu did something he rarely ever did. He changed his mind. Although Melody tried her hardest to stop him from going, Ryu could tell that, ironically, nothing would stop her from doing the same. In a sense, Ryu understood. Melody felt that her pursuit of the highest standard of cultivation had cost her elder sister her life. At the very least, in honor of Granny Miriam, she couldn't give up on her path now. She had to see it to the end. She had to know if it was all worth it. Ryu closed his eyes. Is Little Rock ready? Ryu's sudden voice awoke the worrying Ailsa, who had been trying to find a way of comforting her life partner. MHM. He heals up quite quickly because of his bloodline. Plus, you didn't deal him any fatal blows. In fact, he seemed to be about to break into the 4th order. Ryu nodded. This coming journey would be far easier with Little Rock by his side. Without much more consideration, he set off, promising to come back. During the next month, Ryu did little else but train and cultivate. Not that he usually had something else to do anyway. It was likely that his sudden disappearance had already shaken Melody. But due to his status as throne, the awoken Moon Sect upper echelon was very much aware that he was still alive. Under normal circumstances, one might think that Ryu was escaping his duties as throne, But in practice, only a foolish individual would think this. Firstly, the only resources Ryu took from the sect were techniques. Considering he didn't take their original copies, the sect lost nothing. Secondly, in just a month, Ryu's name had spread across the whole of the Outer Ring, both because of his completion of 6th Order missions and his slap to the face of the cloaked figures. Simply put, for what he took, he had more than repaid his fair share. Plus, it wasn't as though the title of throne had a time limit. For as long as Ryu lived, the faith he accumulated would benefit them. The only ones enraged by his sudden disappearance were those who had ill intentions. With nothing to grasp upon, those who had sought for Ryu's death began to endlessly slander him, speaking of his foolishness and cowardly nature. In the end, the faith Ryu had accumulated was impacted by an easily manipulated public opinion. This much could only be expected. Ryu had hardly interacted with anyone during his stay. In addition, the ones controlling the narrative were figures who had been famous in the Outer Ring for a long time already. The most frustrating part was that it wasn't only those who wanted Ryu dead who participated. The clans whose best interest didn't align with the Awoken Moon sect, rising up thanks to the backing of Ryu's faith, also participated. With each subsequent tournament Ryu didn't attend, things only became worse. Maybe if it wasn't for Melody's abrupt spike in power, the Awoken Moon sect's faith would have been irreparably damaged. As for the person in question, he had already crossed into the inner ring, the thoughts and feelings of such small figures next to irrelevant to him. Ryu continued to cultivate much faster than even he expected. He had already opened his 4th miniature dantian, formed yet another 37 vortexes, and completed his 10th revolution. With this, he officially stepped into the higher Kai refinement realm. To put this speed into context, on the shrine plane, the topmost geniuses on Ryu's wife's level would begin cultivating at 7 years old. By 8 years old, just 1 year later, they would enter the Kai refinement realm. And just 2 years later, at 10 years old, they would become spiritual severing experts. Knowing this truth, it was no wonder Ryu didn't feel proud with his cultivation. But this wasn't the poignant point here. In what amounted to just 2 months, Ryu had already entered the higher Kai refinement realm. And the truth was, he hadn't spent every moment cultivation. In fact, he spent most of his time on Little Rock's back, sending his mind to the 4th floor of Zoo Palace. Ryu was cultivating almost 10 times faster, despite stacking 3 difficult 6-star technique atop of one another. The benefits of great ancestral circle talent were nigh untouchable. If things continued this way, in just a few more years, he would catch up to those geniuses. According to his understanding, those geniuses, despite reaching the spiritual severing realm at 10 years old, wouldn't enter the divine vessel realm until they were 20. Right now, Ryu was 18. However, he didn't spend all of his time on speed. The reason those geniuses so suddenly slowed down was precisely because of how difficult clearing the stages of the spiritual severing realm was. Ryu couldn't underestimate it just for the sake of his pride. Suddenly, Ryu's eyes sharpened. Right here, Little Rock. A proud call left the beautiful lightning hawk's beak as it dove down from the skies. Seeing its speed, Ryu could only shake his head. In order to practice his control over his northern heavenly wind and deepen his understanding, Ryu had tried extending the range of domain to Little Rock. Essentially, he was trying to combine Little Rock's speed with the benefits of his wind inheritance. As for the results, they were shocking beyond belief. Even after becoming used to it, Ryu was still astonished. Crossing from the outer ring into the inner ring, without the help of teleportation formations, would take a connecting heaven realm expert half to a full year. Yet, after Little Rock entered the 4th Order, they took just 1 month. Of course, this was also because those human experts would have to wrap around beast territory so as not to attract those king beasts, something Little Rock didn't have to do thanks to Ryu's cloak. But even still, the matter was shocking. We're here, Ailsa pouted. She was in her full form where even as a woman, she stood almost as tall as Ryu. She had been enjoying the secluded feeling of being by Ryu's side. Though Little Rock was here, The little guy was still immature despite his power, so she liked to take advantage of Ryu using her title as big sister. It was unfortunate that it was coming to an end. Ryu nodded, ignoring the feeling of Ailsa enveloping his arm with her breasts. Ailsa was certain that she was becoming more and more tempting by the day, but it seemed that Ryu's increase in cultivation made his already strong willpower even stronger. This ruin should be the resting place of necromancer Hecate. Creating a legacy world is incredibly difficult. One must have at least cosmic seed realm cultivation, because only it allows for deft enough control of cosmic Kai to form a small realm with your life and will as the catalyst. For those who haven't reached such a great level, they prefer to construct ruins where they can diligently map out trials for potential successors. Of course, there are also eccentrics who choose to form ruins despite having the ability to form legacy worlds. Usually, those are people with very special secondary professions who believe their legacy is best left in such a place. For example, master puppeteers who are very good at creating intricate mechanisms to be used for traps and such, or formation masters who want to test the intelligence of their inheritor. Ailsa listened with bright eyes. Ryu rarely spoke so many words at once. It was nice to know he could be passionate about some things. The trio quickly fell from the skies. Soon, the thick green landscape gained sharpness and detail as a lush forest appeared before them. Ryu's eyes suddenly sharpened, quickly having Ailsa help Little Rock into the incubator as she shrunk to her 6-inch tall size. It seemed after so long, necromancer Hecate's ruins had been found first. Ryu silently descended onto the branch of a thick tree. His body was so weightless that the thin piece of wood hardly registered his appearance. Down below, Ryu's sharp eyes caught sight of several groups of people. It didn't take much observing for Ryu to understand the situation. The ruins had been discovered several months ago by 3 adventuring teams, not all at the same time, but staggered. Unfortunately, the first team didn't have the ability to stop others from trying to take a piece of their discovery, so they could only give way, accepting a 3-way alliance. At least like this, they could gain some security in stopping any more from trying to take part. The 3 teams put their funds together to hire a ruin master from the core region to help them with this exploration. This was currently their 7th venture in necromancer Hecate's ruins. Usually, ruins would be completed in stages. Because of their danger, only a fool or someone supremely confident in their abilities would dare to sleep in one. As a result, groups would often explore for as long as their bodies could hold out before retreating and repeating the process. Still, though much of this made sense, Ryu was curious. Why was it that a ruin that had remained undiscovered for so long suddenly the product of interest for not just one, but 3 groups? What were adventure teams doing so deep within Marandi Forest? Necromancer Hecate wasn't a terribly powerful individual, though she, at the end of her life, could have killed the current Ryu with a single glance, if compared to the true powerhouses of the Shrine Plain. She was lacking. If Ryu recalled correctly, and he knew that he did, at her height she was a Path Extinction Realm expert, a step above the immortal Ring Realm. Ryu had chosen this ruin for 2 reasons. Firstly, because Hecate followed a path of necromancy that intrigued him, and secondly, because his deductions led him to the conclusion that this ruin would be graded at the 5th order. Ruins, much like many other concepts, had grading systems of their own. A 5th order ruin required an Earth-grade ruin master to clear at the very least, or a moderately powerful black-grade ruin master. Of course, Ryu, who had earned the illustrious origin-grade ruin master title, far exceeded these requirements. The unfortunate part was that Ryu's origin-grade status was contingent upon Nuri being by his side. Though no ruin master could match Ryu in knowledge, he was lacking in the power necessary. In the end, Ryu believed that a 5th order ruin was about his limit with his current strength. The reason why all of this was important was because the 3 groups had several divine vessel realm experts with them, and a peak black-grade ruin master. Logically speaking, 7 attempts was far too many, and by the sounds of it, They didn't appear to be close to the end either, or they wouldn't be so irritated. I refused to pay the same amount once more. Do you think I'm made of money? A woman dressed in half silver and half black leather armor spoke out, clearly frustrated. You brought this ruined master to us, and he swore that it would take at most 3 attempts and quoted his price based on this truth. But, not only are we on the 7th attempt, you expect me to continue paying the same quoted price. Amaris is right. The leader of the second group defended the woman. By the look in his eye, he wasn't doing so for some petty love affair, because he was clearly quite irritated himself. Think of your status as a ruined master. Do you really want to cheat small figures like us? An older man with a head of gray hair expressionlessly watched the group. To his side, a younger man with a fat gut but a disproportionately chiseled face stood. He seemed unfeeling toward the concerns of the two groups before him, but he couldn't hide the slight flash of ill intent that coated his eyes after there was mention of his profession. You said it yourself that this was a fifth-order ruin. There's no reason it should take so many attempts to clear with a peak black-grade ruin master, and so many divine vessel experts on our side. Logic is on our side, you're being unreasonable. Amaris piled on. Ryu's eyes narrowed. The two groups have definitely realized that something was wrong, but it's also difficult to give up on an investment after buying in 6 times already. This ruin master and his accomplice understand this, which is why they're so blatant with their disdain. A seemingly untouched ruin found by 3 people at once. It was too much of a coincidence. Ryu needed to figure out his next plan of action. He obviously had no intention of letting any of these individuals benefit from a ruin he had set his mind on. His best bet was to wait until they failed their 7th attempt. But from the way things were going, it was very obvious to a third-party observer that whatever plan the ruin master and his large-bellied accomplice had schemed would be pushed forward. These adventurers had already been pushed to their limit. It was impossible to expect that they'd do this for an 8th time. So this would be their last chance. But why? Were they just trying to squeeze money out of them? But couldn't they take everything they owned by just killing them? Is there a need to keep up this farce for 7 attempts? Ryu, there's a very thick smell of death around them. Ailsa suddenly said. Ryu's eyes narrowed. Are you sure it isn't just from the ruin? It's not more than 100 or so meters away now. No, it's definitely coming from them. But oddly enough, it's only on the 2 irritated groups. The ruin master and the fat man seem unaffected. Is that so? Much like many other professions and paths, necromancy was incredibly complex. The simple title of necromancer might have the same image in the mind of laymen, but the process and beliefs among groups varied greatly. Ryu was interested in Hekati precisely because her path was so novel. A lot of the reason her cultivation was so low was because she spent so much time researching this path. If Ryu was correct, the smell of death might be related to Hekati's path of necromancy. In the end, after listening to the ravings of the 2 groups led by Amaris and Dalon, they reached an agreement. If this 7th attempt had succeeded, they would pay. Should it not succeed, the payment would be reduced. Like this, the 3 groups entered the ruin, followed by a closely lurking shadow. Necromancer Hecate's ruins were located in the middle of this forest, without a dense population of humans for several thousand miles. In addition to this, it wasn't out in the open either. It was hidden within an illusion array that required very precise steps to enter. Unlike the array Ryu broke to enter the natural order sect, this one was meant to be opened like a code, meaning as long as you didn't make a mistake, it was no different from a leisurely stroll. Although if others saw you taking this stroll, they'd believe you to be a lunatic walking in circles. This was yet another reason why Ryu found it baffling that 3 adventure squads could just stumble upon this ruin. Of course, Hekati and those who built ruins prior to their deaths like her didn't leave the discovery of their ruins completely up to chance. What would be the point in spending so much time and effort just to build a ruin no one would ever be able to enter? Hekati left many clues within texts that published her beliefs on the necromancy path, and even within her autobiography. Sometimes, Experts who left ruins behind even left clues within partial techniques they left behind, allowing successors to fight over their legacy. Part of a ruin master's job was to pore over these clues and piece together the truth. To now, Ryu had been the only one to decipher Hekate's riddles, though this achievement wasn't as grand as finding the Death Shrine. The reality was that Hekate was an eccentric. Those who wanted to follow the path of necromancy would be unlikely to look upon her favorably. If it wasn't for Ryu overturning every stone in an attempt to find the Death Shrine, he would have ignored her story as well. Ryu watched as the three groups and singular ruin master entered the illusion array, disappearing one after another. After waiting about half a dozen minutes, he too walked forward, his eyes flashing as he quickly deciphered the array. Though it might seem as simple as following what he had just watched the group before him do, one's senses would become distorted after perfectly performing the first 3 steps of the code, so Ryu could only rely on himself. Soon, Ryu was greeted with a fog-filled world. Except this time, unlike the dream world Osiris, this world was one of death and decay. In the distance, an underground cave entrance could be seen, while not far in front of Ryu, 3 guards stood. After the vast improvement in Ryu's mental realm, he could even enter Breath of Heaven for a decent period of time. But Breath of Earth was more than enough to escape detection with the help of his cloak. The 3 men only felt a slight breeze they directly ignored in this eerie place as Ryu passed by. Just as Ryu was going to enter the underground cave, his footsteps paused, his eyes flashing. Smiling slightly, he almost laughed. He found it amusing that a peak black-grade ruin master would try to lay a trap hidden from him, though Ryu had to commend him for being cautious. Even when he couldn't cultivate, his pupils were already sharper than practically anyone, let alone now. For others, detecting arrays was difficult. They had to cultivate their spiritual kai, then learn how to circulate this kai to their eyes. And even then, the arrays they were qualified to detect were limited by their mental realm. However, there wasn't an array in existence Ryu could detect. Ryu easily found a flaw in the detection array and slipped by it, entering the underground cave to find a dark path gradually increasing in steepness. Seeing 3 paths ahead, Ryu nodded to himself. This was Hekate's first test. He could clearly see the footprints of the path the gray-haired ruin master had chosen. But this reality left Ryu baffled. Why would you choose that path? Don't tell me. Ryu thought of a possibility. If he was right, he could only be frustrated by the outcome. He didn't believe the ruin master was stupid enough to take the wrong path. Even if he was a little unqualified to take on a 5th-order ruin, this was his 7th attempt. The reason why a 5th-order ruin could be cleared by an Earth-grade ruin master or a Black-grade ruin master with divine vessel battle prowess was because this sort of strength allowed mistakes within a certain margin. If this was their 7th attempt and they were still going down the wrong path, there were only 2 explanations. Either Ryu's calculations were wrong, and this ruin had fallen further than he thought in its age, becoming a 4th-order ruin, or there was no real danger anymore. Ryu highly doubted the first was correct. This ruin was once of the 7th order. Age and attrition are what led it to becoming a 5th-order ruin. It should take much more time before it descends to the 4th, though there were ruins that sustained their rankings for longer and even ruins that could increase their order over time. Ryu's research had concluded that this wasn't one of them. This only left the second option. But if the second option was correct, that meant Ryu was already too late. The legacy had already been taken by the ruin master and the fat man. So why would individuals who already had control of the legacy allow others in under the pretext of taking part in a legacy that no longer existed? The answer was simple. What did necromancers need more if not powerful corpses? Ryu had known that Hekate was an eccentric from the beginning. Of the 3 central paths of necromancer, the soul necromancer, the refinement necromancer, and the summoning necromancer, she followed the path of refinement, but an exceptionally odd one. Hekate believed that undead could have and gain will of their own, but she believed that what was blocking this connection between man and corpse was a certain level of intimacy. This sounded like Hecate was just writing down justification for necrophilia. But if this was the case, Ryu would have never wasted his time on her. Weirdness of Hecate's beliefs aside, the substance of them was substantial. Hecate believed the relationship between necromancer and corpse should be akin to the relationship between beast master and beast. In one of her teachings, Will of the Undead, Volume 2, she posited that refining corpses you once knew when they were alive was a shortcut to this level of intimacy. This was what led to her first ostracization from the necromancer community. She turned her own late husband into a corpse puppet. In Volume 3, she posited the theorem that caught Ryu's attention. She introduced a slow, refining technique that cultivated the living into undead, allowing them to maintain their will. This would, before Ryu could finish remembering the details, the screams of Amaris and Dullant shook him awake. Ryu glided down the path at a pace that dwarfed most spiritual severing experts. With his sharp eyes, any protections the ruined master left were next to useless. It didn't take much time at all for him to make it to the edge of a small opening. The scene could only be described as horrid. The bodies of Amaris and Dullant, not to mention their fellow adventurers, was seemingly rotting from the inside out. The entrance Ryu stood at was elevated far above the ground floor of this opening. If one was down below, his place would appear to be just one of many hive-like openings. From Ryu's deep understanding of ruins, he immediately understood this oddity. The path here was relatively short, but before the ruin was cleared, it definitely wasn't so. Hecate's ruins were probably a maze of forceful teleportations. So although the path to this place seemed short, the reality was that it would have taken Ryu several weeks to make it here, had the ruin not already been cleared. At this moment, the ruin master probably couldn't imagine that someone had made it here and was silently observing his evil actions, nor did Ryu want to allow him to know too soon. The fact that the ruin master was able to fake 7 entries, despite the shortness of the passage, definitely meant that this was an inheritable ruin, meaning it was entirely under his control. In such a situation, Ryu had to be careful. As for the adventurers dying below, what did this have to do with him? Considering Ailsa's explanation of their situation, Ryu didn't have the ability to save them even if he wanted to risk his life for strangers. Ha ha, Amaris, Dullant, you never expected that there would be a day like this one, did you? The man with the bulging stomach laughed uproariously. The 2 squadron leaders, who had both been writhing in pain, looked toward the fat man with furious expressions. But no matter how hard they tried, they couldn't remember having any impression of him. It was then the fat man did something inexplicable. His hands grasped at his protruding belly and pulled outward, but the grotesque image of flying blood and guts didn't occur. Instead, a toned upper body was revealed. It was clear that the so-called fat man wasn't very fat at all. Though Ryu had found it odd that such a fat man could have such a chiseled jaw, he hadn't thought much about it, nor did he look into it. In his mind, who would be foolish enough to disguise themselves as a fat man but forget to give themselves protruding cheeks? So he marked it down as a genetic oddity of the man and left it be. Who would have known that the man was truly in disguise? This most definitely taught Ryu a silent lesson. He had his pupils, but he didn't use them. Trusting his own logic and applying it to that of other people could one day lead to a fatal mistake. The formerly fat man forcefully wiped his face, slowly revealing a scarred but relatively similarly shaped visage. The more of his true face appeared, the paler Amaris and Dullant became. 70 years ago you 2 nearly ruined my life. The man growled. To think I used to love such a whore. I hope you enjoy the rest of your life as a corpse puppet. When Ruin Master Vitae told me that I could condemn you both to eternal hell, how could I miss such a chance? Morake, Amaris, weakly reached out, her once beautiful face draining of life. All those decades ago, her and Morake truly were in a relationship, but she had betrayed him. Dullant, who had been jealous of Morake's handsome face, didn't let him be for fear one day Amaris would regret her decision. So he destroyed his face before her. The irony of it all was the Thousandth's actions proved how vain of a woman Amaris was, yet he still wanted her by his side. It was truly a tale that made one shake their heads. As time passed, Thousandth and Amaris both entered the divine vessel realm, and were even currently on the verge of entering the connecting heaven realm while Morake lagged too far behind, his revenge growing further and further away by the day. That was, until he met Ruin Master Vitae. "Y'all never get it back. Do you think I would come to a dangerous place with it on hand?" Thousandth cackled maniacally, as though he would have the last laugh in the end. "You were always a pathetic bastard. Even in the end, you're still so foolish. Just like the two of us, you too will die here today, once again betrayed by someone you thought was an ally." Ryu's eyes narrowed. Just 70 years ago, Amaris and Thousandth were in the spiritual severing realm. Isn't that what Morake's words implied? But Ryu was shaken slightly. The age required to be named a genius upon entering the divine vessel realm was 20 years old, but the threshold for entering the connecting heaven realm was 100 years. What did that mean? It meant that somehow, two adventurers had matched the pace of geniuses of the shrine plane to cross from the spiritual severing realm to the peak divine vessel realm in just 70 years. It was inconceivable. Of course, Ryu believed he could dwarf this speed. Opening one's Kai vessels might take a long time for others, but with his advantages, he didn't believe it would take him very long at all. But the poignant point was that this pair of adventurers should have never been able to match this pace. Ryu racked his brain, trying to think of treasures that could explosively increase cultivation speed. Usually, despite having many such treasures on hand, geniuses of the shrine plane disdained to use them. It wasn't just disdain, but also a healthy aversion. Using such treasures could ruin one's foundation. Plus, since much of later cultivation relied on comprehension, they would quickly become useless. Only individuals of this lower plane would start nearly century-long feuds over such a trivial item. However, Ryu was interested in this item for another reason: its resale value. After all, he still needed to come up with 10 medial immortal stones. Though such an item was useless to him, it was definitely worth at least that much. And considering how close he already was to the spiritual severing realm, he would definitely have to pay that higher amount to enter the moon world. In truth, Ryu actually hoped the treasure wasn't too great, or else it would be difficult to find an auction house capable of selling it. As Ryu was lost in his thought, a familiar sound of a blade piercing flesh rang in his ears. He didn't need to look to know that Ruin Master Vitae had killed Morake. The man lived his life to be betrayed, it seemed. "Come out. I know you're there." This, however, startled Ryu. Ryu's eyes narrowed, but other than this, he didn't move a single inch. He thought that it might be a possibility that after gaining complete control over the Ruin Master Vitae might have become capable of sensing all of the changes that occurred within what was effectively his domain now. Ryu hadn't thought of this possibility before, but after he heard those words, he realized it might be possible. This ruin was at most of the 7th order at its peak. A path extinction realm expert like necromancer Hekati is limited to an 8th order ruin at most, even if my calculations are wrong. But as a necromancer, even if she dabbled in formation theory, it would be impossible for Hekati to form an 8th order ruin. The conclusion is obvious. Whether a 7th or 8th order ruin, it doesn't matter. It's impossible for such a lowly ranked ruin to allow its owner a symbiotic relationship like this ruin master is displaying now. This means one of two things. Either he's bluffing and simply wants to see if he can goad a person he isn't certain of being present and to appear, or he's relying on something else entirely different in order to sense my presence. Ruin Master Vitae could have never expected that his opponent was a ruin master by far his better. Ryu's knowledge of ruins dwarfed practically everyone in existence. Trying to take advantage of such a scare tactic before him was asking to be slapped in the face. The room fell into silence, a deep frown creeping up on the ruined master's face. Unconsciously, he brought his hands together, rotating a ring on his right middle finger. Suddenly, Ryu smirked. He understood at that moment why the ruined master had called out seemingly arbitrarily. Humans often had a knack for feeling the gaze of others. This ability only diminished when the person observing reached a level far beyond that of the individual being observed, either in cultivation or concealment ability. There were many theories as to why this might be. Some believed that gazing upon a person tied your karmas together, subtly shifting energy balance of a person. Though one might not consciously understand what happened, you would unconsciously. Others believed that this was an innate instinct humans had similar to the sharp senses of beasts. It was just that we evolved to rely on it less and less, resulting in the ability diminishing through the generations. If one were to go through all of the possibilities, it would form a set of volumes even longer than necromancer Hecate's lifeworks. But what was important here was that the ability existed. The ring vitae unconsciously touched answered Ryu's doubt. When Ryu's pupils focused on it, he was able to see that this ring was actually a treasure used to detect and raise awareness. It amplified this innate ability of humans by fusing it with one's mental realm, essentially combining instinct with power. It served the same function as Ryu's throbbing pupils, though far less sophisticated. Simply put, Ruin Master Vitae called out to Ryu because his ring warned him that someone was gazing upon him. This isn't a simple treasure at all if it's able to work despite my cloak. Ryu's eyes narrowed. Ryu suddenly jumped out, gliding smoothly across the air as though he was a swallow. His body was as light as a feather, and the wind seemed to meld into his being, silently supporting him. Ryu knew that as long as he had the intention to attack, his cloaking would be seen through, which meant he only had a single chance. By moving, he was already pushing the ability of his mystical grade cloak to its limits, fully aware that it could only display its full strength when he was completely still. But he only had two choices in this situation: either escape with his tail between his legs, or kill this so-called Ruin Master. Ruin Master Vitae was a middle divine vessel realm expert, a man who was far beyond Ryu's capabilities as it stood now. But Ryu had become strong enough to harm such an expert if they insisted on being a motionless combat puppet. Ryu closed his eyes. Suddenly, Vitae felt that the thrumming of his ring had come to a complete stop. But this reality only made his nerves stand up taller. Though many didn't know it, becoming a black-grade Ruin Master while having such low cultivation was unheard of. Usually, only connecting heaven realm experts would be of the black grade. Ruin Master Vitae was truly an anomaly. Realizing he had poor cultivation talent, he poured himself into the Ruin Master profession after becoming lucky enough to stumble upon a Ruin Matrix. He had hoped to use his profession to make enough money to compensate for his poor talent, and it worked mostly, but even in his old age, he only managed to become a divine vessel realm expert. If it wasn't for his status as Ruin Master, he would be considered a minor expert of the inner ring. He had always imagined himself to be a great man, believing that he could overcome his weakness with hard work, but that was when a heart-wrenching reality set in. Even if he was a Ruin Master, he could only rely on the commission of others. Even if part of a Ruin Master's job was finding ruins themselves, only the best of the best among them could do this. Thanks to his fortuitous encounter, Ruin Master Vitae managed to become one of these individuals. In fact, it was he who found necromancer Hecate's ruins. The problem was that he was too weak. He didn't dare to enter ruins alone, and the ones he could enter alone weren't good enough to help him transcend his weak talent. It was then he happened upon this ruin, and a new potential path was open to him. What if he relied on corpse puppets instead? With his fortuitous encounter by his side, and undead to take on most of the dangers, he would finally be able to leave the mediocrity of his being behind. He had finally done it. He had finally found a path forward. So, why was this happening? Ruin Master Vitae looked down at the spear piercing through his heart, his life flashing before his eyes as violent spear kai tore through his inner organs. Why? I worked so hard. No one would think ruined Master Vitai to be a valiant warrior, but watching him cry tears of sorrow in his final moments made Ryu feel uncomfortable in his heart. Ruined Master Vitai didn't even gaze into Ryu's eyes with any hatred. His expression of resignation was more damning than any other emotion he could have displayed. Ruin Master Vitai collapsed. His final words almost sent Ryu into a tailspin. What if it was him next time? He worked harder than anyone, but what if it still wasn't enough? Even worse, what if he lost his life to someone who wasn't qualified to stand before like ruined Master Vitai had? Ryu sighed, closing his eyes. He had never regretted killing anyone, even his first kill hardly shook him. But this felt different. Even knowing ruined Master Vitai had just taken an innocent life just moments ago, Ryu couldn't help but feel uncomfortable. Ailsa remained silent, simply allowing Ryu to absorb these truths. If Ryu wanted to one day become an expert, he had to understand the essence of life. The more he experienced, the more feelings he felt, the better it was for his future development. If he allowed this to stall him now, he simply was never meant to reach the peak he sought for. Ryu forcefully moved his gaze from Vitai's lifeless corpse, gazing toward the others. 2 peak Divine Vessel Realm experts, 4 middle Divine Vessel Realm experts, 6 lower Divine Vessel Realm experts, and 24 spiritual Severing Realm experts, all dead under the schemes of one man. Ryu didn't count this number to help justify Vitai's death. Instead, he did so to remind himself how fleeting life was. In this situation, so many died, but how many were right and how many were wrong? Amaris and Dullant had slighted Morake, but they left him alive. Did they deserve to die for a betrayal? And what about their adventure squads? Maybe they had done other things in their lives to deserve this death. But how would Morake know that? His only goal was the death of the 2 leaders. And Vitai, he killed the seemingly innocent Morake. But was Morake innocent at all? For the sake of his revenge, he didn't care about the lives of more than 30 other individuals. How could he be labeled as innocent? There really is no objective right or wrong. Ryu mumbled to himself. Ryu seemed to have comprehended something, but the feeling was fleeting. Maybe he wasn't yet qualified to grasp it in its entirety. One after another, Ryu placed the corpses within his spatial ring. Since ruined Master Vitai had been so kind as to prepare so many undead for him, there was no reason to turn his nose up at it. Because he had opened his spiritual vessel, Ryu was qualified to control 6th Order corpse puppets. But being qualified to do something and being able to do it were 2 different matters entirely. Ryu hadn't learned a single thing about necromancy yet, so for now, it was impossible. Gazing at ruined Master Vitai's corpse, Ryu sighed once more. Considering the damage Ryu had done to his innards, he wasn't a viable corpse puppet any longer. Though there were many branches of necromancy that only required the skeleton, necromancy Hekate's path required the whole body to be intact. Taking off his 3 rings, Ryu observed them closely. With a thought, he slipped on the ring that he believed increased Vitai's awareness. A moment later, Ryu's eyes widened. This is the ruin's core. No wonder. Its abilities would definitely be greater here than it would be elsewhere. It can help create a pseudo-symbiotic relationship with the ruins, but that's as far as it goes. Looking around at the various lab tools that took up the central portion of this hive-like space, Ryu understood. Hekate used this place as her base of operations. All of her experiments were run here. It's no wonder she'd create something that helped her keep control of it all. This likely means that these ruins can also move. This ring should be of the heaven grade. It's able to increase my spiritual sense range by 20%. And has a built-in threat warning. Within these ruins, it can increase my spiritual sense by 100% and can warn me against the threat of even an immortal ring expert. Not bad. Ryu didn't know how useful this ring would be to him, but as the core of these ruins, he would keep it by his side. He hadn't forgotten the 2 guards outside, both of whom were peak spiritual severing, but Ryu didn't think he needed much to defeat them. Plus, they should be expecting this expedition to take another several days, so there was no rush to deal with them either. Taking his attention away from the ruin core, Ryu focused on the remaining 2 rings, both of which was spatial rings. Without a doubt, there was something that immediately caught his attention. Ruin matrix. Ryu turned his gaze toward Vitae and shook his head. Though this ruin matrix was far inferior to his personal matrix from the shrine plane, there was no doubt that it was excellent. Ruin matrices were versatile tools for ruin masters, and were most definitely their most important possessions. They could be used to do everything from sensing nearby ruins to calculating the order of an unknown ruin. Of course, ruin matrices were divided into grades of their own. Vitae's matrix was actually of the mystical grade. This meant that it functioned without loss for ruins up to the 10th order. Functionally speaking, that covered more than 99% of ruin in all of existence. Expert ruin masters could do without ruin matrices, which was why Ryu was still confident in his ability to clear this ruin. But there was no doubt that a ruin matrix made things easier. With it, Ryu could probably clear a 7th order ruin now without increasing his battle prowess. Convenient. I wouldn't have been able to afford a decent matrix for a long while without this encounter. Pouring through the rest of Ruin Master Vitae's belongings, Ryu found several thick leather books that detailed the Ruin Master profession. This had likely been his fortuitous encounter. With the Ruin Masters being such a noble profession, its secrets were deeply protected. Vitae was very lucky to find this despite how his life ended. I could definitely sell these books. They alone are worth several higher immortal Kai stones, considering they come from the teachings of a mystical grade Ruin Master. I'll only sell one. If I bring out too many books from a Ruin Master of that caliber, anyone with half a brain will guess I stumbled upon a legacy and will assume I've hidden the matrix. I'll keep the matrix, though it would likely sell for several cosmic Kai stones. It's worth more than that to me right now. Plus, I can't protect that kind of wealth, nor can I reach an auction house capable of taking such a sale on. Finally, after continuing, Ryu found the essence of Hecate's legacy. Dozens of thick, black books, refinement materials, an odd staff, and a black half-mask. This was what remained of Necromancer Hecate. The volumes of information were as expected. They described the path of necromancy from the ground up, beginning with the simplest of concepts, describing the different branches, before finally focusing on Hecate's path and her belief structure. What was more curious were the half-mask and staff. The staff, called the Death Weed Staff, had a few basic functions. It increased spiritual Kai absorption speed, deepened one's connection with death, and helped during certain refining procedures. Deathweed was a spiritual herb that grew from fallen branches of trees born of Death Kai. They had the toughness and consistency of twine, and when layered like this into a tightly woven staff, it could be incredibly sturdy. Ryu didn't find it to be any weaker than his current Earth-grade weapons. As for the half-mask, it functioned to obscure one's visage. It was convention among necromancers to hide their faces. Though being a necromancer wasn't exactly taboo, it also wasn't a noble profession either. There were many stories of necromancers who were tracked down and killed for using the corpses of long-dead individuals from lofty clans. In the end, to protect each other, necromancers covered their faces with similar half-masks, making it more difficult to recognize them. Of course, this was an incredibly old convention, and only used by those who kept the body whole during their refinement process. For soul or summoning necromancers, it was unnecessary. It was also unnecessary for necromancers who refined the body down to the bones. Since Hecate's path was especially grating on one's senses, it would make sense for her to wear a mask like this. The mask itself was of the higher heaven grade and could hide one's face, scaling to one's mental realm. As a spiritual endowment expert, Ryu could protect his face from divine vessel, connecting heaven realm and even immortal ring experts as long as they hadn't entered the soul birth realm. After sifting through this, all that was left was Vitae's wealth. As a ruin master, it didn't need to be said that he was rich. In fact, he was more wealthy than Leopold, or rather, he should have been. Ryu could only shake his head. Vitae had spent all of his money resources and cultivation techniques. His spatial ring was filled with 4- and 5-star mortal and immortal techniques. There were even a few obscenely expensive 6-star mortal techniques. Seeing this sight, Ryu understood why this was. Vitae had been of poor talent, but he didn't accept this truth. He thought that maybe he just hadn't found the right technique for him. So he crazily spent his riches buying endless techniques and trying them one after another. With this sort of fickle personality, there was no way he could have become the expert he dreamed of. I'm not sure if it's safe to resell these techniques. If I do so, someone sharp might remember that they were originally bought by Vitae. I'm not sure what this man's background was, but a ruin master is bound to have some friends. Someone might even know about his fortuitous encounter and become greedy. If I want to sell them, it can't be in the inner ring at least. Once he finished this, Ryu went through the spatial rings of the adventurers. Adventurers were actually just mercenaries who focused on discovering new lands and exploring novel territories. A group of strong adventurers like this would definitely have some wealth, not having squandered it all like Vitae. Unfortunately, it was less than Ryu expected once again. Remembering that Vitae had cheated the adventurers out of 6 payments, Ryu suddenly understood. Their wealth had likely gone to the spendthrift. At that moment, the scion of the Tatsuya clan, a man who had never wanted for money, felt frustrated. In the end, Ryu accumulated another 5,000 medial mortal Kai stones and a 50 superior mortal Kai stones, bringing his wealth to 52 lower mortal Kai stones, 15,000 medial mortal Kai stones, 150 superior mortal Kai stones, and 3 lower immortal Kai stones. I should spend this wealth. It's useless to just accumulate it. The incubator needs more spiritual herbs to display its value, and I need another defensive treasure. This time one that lasts me more than just a month. Ryu put his gains away. After retreating to the entrance of the ruin and silently slaughtering the 3 remaining adventurers, he returned to Hekate's lab and began to pore over her legacy. It was impossible for Ryu to know whether or not the adventurers or Vitae told anyone else about this ruin, so he knew that he needed to be careful. He speculated that this ruin could be moved, so he needed to grasp the essence of it all quickly. As it turned out, Hekate's ruin was actually an underground immortal cave. Immortal caves were the abodes of high-level cultivators and could be both stationary and mobile. Usually, immortal caves were explored by ruin masters only when a cultivator died before they could prepare a legacy world or a ruin. It was rare for a cultivator to knowingly turn their immortal cave into a ruin. Hekate believed that the most noble creature was the death worm. According to her teachings, this worm helped death pass on and left life behind. After tearing away the flowery speech, the essence was that death worms were scavengers, and their feces was excellent fertilizer. Their only specialty was that they were practically immune to death Kai, which was odd for such a weak creature. Either way, Hekate used this pious belief to construct her immortal cave to the image of a death worm. If a mortal were to see its full structure, it would look no different from a common earthworm, right down to the grotesque maroon-black exterior. Ryu felt lucky that it was buried underground, or else he really wouldn't have the face to travel in such a vehicle. Ailsa giggled lightly as Ryu finally took hold of the controls, diving deep into the underground. Seeing that Ryu didn't bother to ask her why she was laughing, she took the initiative. Want to hear something funny? Ryu sighed, having a feeling he knew where this was going. What is it? You entered the death worm's butthole to get here. Ailsa burst into a fit of laughter. If it wasn't for her small stature and her place on Ryu's shoulders, there's no question that her undulating breasts would be the center point of any man's vision. Ryu was speechless. You entered too, was all he could say. After moving the death worm immortal cave a good distance away, Ryu realized that it had stalled. He would have liked to move it further, but there were 2 main issues. Firstly, it hadn't been maintained in hundreds of millions of years. Its joints were stiff, and its moving parts were definitely in terrible condition. Secondly, movement required energy. After shifting the immortal cave's place several dozen miles away, what remained of its energy was completely drained. Ryu would feel very foolish right now if it wasn't for the fact the ruin core allowed him to teleport directly to the closest point on the surface. If not, he would have to dig his way out. Because of the immortal cave structure, it was able to chew up dirt from the front and pass it to the back, perfectly concealing its trace. But this also meant that, without the ruin core, one could be buried alive if they weren't careful enough. This much was fine for Ryu for now, though. He wasn't very deep below the surface, but he was deep enough that he didn't believe any random individual could find him. Plus, the immortal cave was still protected by an illusory array of the heaven grade. Not just anyone could see through it, at least not without a ruin matrix. Now that he wasn't worried about being found in a short time, Ryu turned his attention back to Hecata's legacy. He still had the words of Bloodline in the back of his mind, but for now, he ignored the treasure that started the feud. Between Amaris, Bloodline and Morake, Ryu was sure there were likely some clues within his spatial ring about where he hid it, but for now, he couldn't be bothered. In truth, had Ryu had the ruin matrix before choosing Hecata's ruin, he likely would have chosen another target. He had only chosen Hecate because he believed her ruin had fallen to a manageable fifth order and was mildly interested in her perspectives. But that was all. Still, he seriously considered the information she left behind. "Do you know anything about necromancy, little Ryu?" Ailsa asked. "Not much. I'm only familiar with its superficial knowledge, like its three main branches and the numerous sub-branches. Of these, Hecate falls within the refinement necromancer branch, and created her own special sub-branch known as the living refinement necromancer branch. The three main branches of necromancy were soul necromancy, summoning necromancy, and refinement necromancy. Soul necromancers were masters of reaping souls. In terms of difficulty, they were actually ranked second among the three. This was because the only souls that could be reaped were ones that had undergone soul birth, meaning the minimum requirement of a corpse. Puppet a soul necromancer was that it had to be fresh, no more than a few minutes, and that it had to be the corpse of an immortal ring expert at the very least. One can see from this minimum requirement that one must already be powerful to even think of choosing this path. Summoning necromancy, though, proudly stood at first ranked in difficulty. Oddly enough, it didn't have such a high minimum threshold, but the danger was several times more apparent. This was because summoning necromancers communicated with the nether world. When Ryu spoke with Monalize, the very place they didn't dare to speak of, the very place Ryu's father had entered to try and pull his dead son back, was this very nether world. Summoning necromancers communicated with the nether world and formed contracts with demons and devils of the nether world, bringing them to the world of the living to fight for them. Even if some looked down on necromancers, none dared to look down upon summoning necromancers. These individuals were without a doubt some of the most powerful experts to ever exist. Unfortunately, with power came rarity. It was quite ironic. Ryu had found the entrance to the nether world, something countless summoning necromancers of the past tried and failed to do, because he located the death shrine. But he didn't know of a single summoning necromancer ruin. This was because experts of that caliber would definitely form legacy worlds. Though an eccentric who forewent forming a legacy world to create a ruin might exist, Ryu hadn't found him or her. Finally, there was the most common of necromancy paths, the refinement necromancer. These individuals were the most often thought of when necromancers were mentioned, and directly created their corpse puppets from either the full bodies or skeletons of experts. Usually, top-tier refinement necromancers could create corpse puppets that retained 70% of its original fighting ability, but most could only maintain about 30%. This dip was then made up for by further refinement to strengthen the puppet, sometimes resulting in an undead stronger than its living original. According to Hecate, there were many different ways to refine corpses. Some used spiritual herbs, others used natural resources such as volcanoes, while others preferred to turn their corpses into undead weapons, integrating precious metals into them. Strictly speaking, comprehension of death kai wasn't necessary to control corpse puppets, but it was an integral part of the refinement process. In addition, comprehension of death kai greatly lessened the mental burden of controlling corpses as well, not to mention prevented corpses from rotting. In order to control a corpse, one needed to form a death seal. Some were more complex than others. The prestige of a death seal is usually what decided the prestige of necromancer. Famous necromancy clans and sects had extraordinarily deep legacies revolving around their death seals. Hecate's death seal was quite good. In fact, it was fairly impressive. She had a legacy capable of sealing corpses up to the 8th order. This was quite good for a refinement necromancer. What was more impressive was that Hecate's seals mandated the manipulation of death kai. Though simpler death seals skipped over this requirement, more complex and intricate seals made it a necessity. The fact Hecate's mandated it was more proof that it was quite a good death seal. The issue that remained was that Ryu had no idea how to manipulate death kai. Seeing through the essence of the seals and remembering their structure was as easy as breathing for Ryu, but he had no idea how to form them. There were only two options. Ryu had to either become a death heir and learn to manipulate death kai through it, or he had to use the cultivation techniques Hekate left behind to accumulate death kai. Not wanting to comprehend just any inheritance, Ryu had no choice but to choose the latter. Ryu had chosen to cultivate 3 6-star cultivation techniques at once. However, each focused primarily on increasing kai density and didn't have any special abilities, though this neutral type kai was the easiest to accumulate. With this ease came the disadvantage of being a master of none. Neutral kai could meld into any technique, but it was impossible to take a technique to its theoretical peak using neutral kai. Reason being, every technique had a type of kai most suitable to it. In this case, though death seals could be formed without the use of death kai, the very best death seals could not do without it. If Ryu wanted to form one, he would have no choice but to learn to manipulate death kai. Ryu sighed. If I knew this ahead of time, I probably wouldn't have invested so much time into reaching this place. In the end, Ryu was reluctant to convert his neutral kai into death kai. The singular benefit of necromancy, it wasn't worth it, especially since it was mere refinement necromancy. If it was the legacy of a summoning necromancer before him, he wouldn't hesitate in the slightest. Ryu was still too immature in the ways of the martial world. Because he wasn't familiar with the specifics of numerous paths, he had neglected such an important point. This was yet another lesson for him. If only he had a cultist fairy, he wouldn't even need a legacy to become a summoning necromancer. Ailsa smiled. What are you worrying for with me here? Do you believe I would let you waste so much time by coming here? You look down on your big sis too much. Ryu turned to Ailsa, who sat on his shoulder, a peculiar light in his eyes. You have a way. MHM. Ailsa smiled a devious smile. But you have to call me Big Sis first. Ryu coughed. You're almost 1 billion years old. Can't you be a bit more mature? HMPH. What did I tell you about speaking of a lady's age? Ryu cleared his throat. Please help me, Big Sis. Ailsa was surprised Ryu caved so easily. It took all the fun out of it. But she could only sigh. Ryu had definitely calculated that this would deal the best blow to her. What a sneaky little boy. You're forgetting something very important. The miniature dancing of your 6th-realm opening technique aren't just for show. Ryu's eyes shone. Of his 3 kai techniques, this one was maybe the most curious. It was able to expand one's kai pulses to be used as a store of kai, thus vastly increasing a cultivator's energy stores. To now, Ryu had opened 4 of them to enter the higher kai refinement realm. He had 2 more to go, one for the peak kai refinement realm, and the final for the half-step spiritual severing realm. The best benefit of 6th realm opening isn't just its greater energy stores. You can essentially treat each miniature dancing as its own little world. As your true dancing has a spiritual foundation within it, you can build new foundations within your miniature danctions. Of course, these won't be spiritual foundations, as you won't be able to plant cosmic seeds in them in the future, but they still have great use to you. Usually, cultivating multiple Kai types is next to impossible, except for those with special bone structures. For example, the heaven-grade twin star bone structure, the sovereign-grade yin-yang bone structure, or the ancestral-grade karmic flow bone structure, to name a few. However, there are also special bloodline, meridians, and cultivation techniques as well. Ailsa laughed, seeing that Ryu understood her meaning. 6-realm opening technique will allow you to cultivate and use 6 separate kiss. The immortal 6-realm opening after you open your Kai vessels will allow you 6 more. 6-realm opening would only allow you to store inferior Kai types of a lower grade. You normally wouldn't be able to access higher Kai grades until you began using the immortal version of the technique. But even then, if you wanted to store the highest grade kiss, you'd have to rely on your true Danshin. But because you have chaotic silk meridians, these limitations don't apply to you. So, what once was a generally ignored auxiliary ability of this technique is akin to giving a tiger wings to you. Ryu didn't need to hear anymore, since he didn't need to convert all of his Kai into Death Kai, and only needed to occupy a single one of his pulses. With this Kai, this matter became extremely convenient. The only gripe he had was that Hekate's cultivation technique, Gravestone Hymn, was only 4-star and gathered an inferior type of Death Kai. Unfortunately, Death Kai was a broad umbrella term that encompassed many kiss suitable for this category. Hekate's Death Kai was nominally known as Grave Kai and was a heaven-grade Kai type. Luckily, this meant it reached the bare requirements for having an immortal version of itself. Unfortunately, it would never see the cosmic Kai realm. Kai grades of common and black, and many Earth only had mortal Kai versions. Some Earth and all heaven-grade kiss had immortal Kai versions, meaning they could be used into the connecting heaven realm. Only mystical and ancestral grade kiss could upgrade further into cosmic Kai. Luckily for many, neutral Kai was unranked and could smoothly transition to the very best cosmic Kai. Still, Ryu was content with this for now. With the ruin matrix, a wider door had opened up for him, so he quickly focused on cultivating this new grave Kai. Within the inner ring, a group of white-haired elders had come together, each exuding powerful auras. It's already been almost a half-year since Second Grand Elder Leopold's life flame extinguished, and now yet another member of our Zhu clan is dead. Elder Dallant's life flame has vanished. For their once mighty clan, the loss of a connecting heaven and a peak divine vessel realm expert was too much. Their strength had declined by at least half in less than a year. A truly devastating blow. Finding the culprit is important, but I'm sure you all are thinking something else. Whatever treasure Elder Dallant used to grow so powerful so quickly, with his death we must find it. The Zhu elder looked toward the elder who spoke with incredulous gazes. Clans always placed benefits over everything else, but this truth was always hidden beneath a veneer of politeness. However, this elder didn't seem to care for such things at all. We don't have the luxury of playing up a facade of good-heartedness. Our Zhu clan has fallen generation after generation, from a mighty people to scattering cockroaches, to a point where we can finally lift our heads again. Second Grade Elder was our hope to return to this realm's highest peak once more, but he's failed due to unknown reasons. Now, a promising youth has fallen as well. You all know as well as I that Elder Dallant is not as talented as he's shown in the past few decades. However, we have all refrained from prying into his secrets from him for various reasons, namely because we are not in a state where we can afford to have internal strife within our clan. The elders shook their heads at their first Grand Elder's shamelessness. The first part of his words were true. Many years ago, mental realm masters were taboo. Due to the actions of a few, they were ostracized from society and forced to hide. As a result, not everyone aware of the secrets of the Tatsuya clan's fall were angry. Some, like this very Zhu clan, were very happy, believing the Tatsuya clan got what they deserved. However, the second part was nonsense. Why was it that a member of a clan of great standing in the inner ring was denigrated to the point of becoming a mere adventurer and mercenary? It was precisely because their first grand elder pushed him into a corner, forcing him to leave the clan. They were a half-step sixth-order clan, yet one of their elders was an adventurer. How embarrassing was that? This order grade might seem just a single step above the fifth order, but don't be fooled. The difference between the Zhu clan and the Awoken Moon sect was akin to heaven and earth. The only way to gain the half-step moniker was by having an expert an entire order above, but lacking the necessary number of order experts. Simply put, the Zhu clan had a seventh-order expert, a mighty immortal ring realm ancestor, but just didn't have enough connecting heaven realm experts to meet the requisite 10 minimum requirement. This strength was enough to rank them within the top 5 powers of the inner ring. Yet once again, one of their elders was an adventurer. Decades ago, the oddity in thousandth's cultivation speed was exposed. Back then, it hadn't been obvious enough to warrant a feverish attempt by them. But the first Grand Elder still elected to hold a disciple-choosing competition. As expected, thousandth won, though he shouldn't have, which led to a fiendish round of questioning from the first Grand Elder. Luckily for thousandth, he was clever and quickly left the clan, becoming an adventurer soon after. Many years later, the Zhu clan, hearing of his exploits, conferred him the title of Elder, hoping he would come back. But it had already been over a decade since then, and not even thousandth's shadow had re-entered their clan lands. There was only one person to blame for all of this. Pretending not to see the weird gazes, the first Grand Elder continued. Ancestor and Patriarch Zhu are laying the foundation for our clan to enter the core region within the next few thousand years. But this will be impossible without becoming a true sixth-order clan first. Finding thousandth's treasure is of utmost importance. I propose we mobilize our clan's resources and find out the truth behind these matters. No one is qualified to stop us. With his word being the highest authority remaining in the clan, the first Grand Elder's suggestion became law. Soon, the Zhu clan began to mobilize their resources, upturning every stone. Unfortunately for the remaining clans of the inner ring, the Zhu clan's influence was too strong. Even the remaining 4 clans matching them in strength didn't dare to act rashly. Everyone knew how dangerous mental realm masters were. They were the last enemy anyone wanted to make. Plus, under the guise of investigating the death of an elder, the Zhu clan had the moral high ground. Ryu quickly grasped the essence of the 4-star cultivation technique, Gravestone him. Since he cultivated neutral Kai, it didn't clash with his current cultivation at all. In addition, once the Grave Kai was stored within his first Kai pulse, it would no longer affect his subsequent Kai comprehensions as well. According to xianxia, it was also possible to abolish Kai he had comprehended, but this came with a price. Any cultivation breakthroughs or progression he made with this Kai would also be abolished. So, Ryu had to be selective with how he used Grave Kai. He didn't expect to continuously rely on a mere heaven-grade Kai from a 4-star technique. With the Ruin Matrix, he would be able to take his time and find ruins which would likely store better Death Kai cultivation techniques. With all of this in mind, Ryu didn't use the Grave Kai he began to accumulate to push his realm forward. Instead, he sent it directly to his Kai pulse, slowly gathering it into a revolving orb separate from his remaining cultivation. This way, he could abolish it any time without worry. In order to measure his progress, Ryu gauged his accumulated Grave Kai by how many death seals it could form, specifically how many 5th-order death seals it could form. After about 3 days, he had reached 1 unit. After a week, he reached 3. Ryu chose to stop after this. He calculated that the limit his Kai pulse could hold was about 100. This translated to 1 if the unit was for 6th-order death seals. Ryu currently had 12 5th-order corpses, but no 6th-order ones, so this didn't matter much for now. Still, he only planned to form 2 corpse puppets, one with Amaris and the other with thousandth, both of whom were peak divine vessel realm experts before their death. This would lead to a qualitative increase in his comprehensive strength, if he could learn to control them, that is. After forming his first death seal, Ryu's struggles truly began. First, when he tried to imprint the seal with a stamp from his spiritual kai, he shattered it due to the fact his mental realm now had a lightning character. By the time he learned to separate the lightning from his spiritual kai, he found out that controlling a corpse wasn't anywhere near as easy as he first thought. Amaris struggled to stand up, only to fall face first, her tall nose bending at an awkward angle. She moved to push herself up, but she ended up flipping her legs over her head, resulting in her armored skirt flipping upward and revealing a bit too much. Maybe if she hadn't been a corpse with ghastly gray skin, it would have been an attractive sight. But to Ryu, even if she was alive, he was too frustrated to enjoy the view either way. Ailsa clutched her toned belly, laughing so hard that her ample chest rippled like ocean waters under the moonlight. Ryu hardly ever had embarrassing moments on this level. How could she not take full advantage? In fact, she had entered her true full form, just so she could get her jokes off more easily. Wiping her tears, she decided to finally help. Little Ryu, you're like a weightlifter trying to learn the technique and form of a complicated lift, but you're still using a fully loaded bar instead of a weightless one. What did you expect would happen? Ryu paused, leaving Amaris' corpse awkwardly sprawled as he wiped the sweat from his forehead. What do you mean? No matter her dainty body, Amaris was still a divine vessel realm expert. The armor on her body weighs at least several 10,000 jin. Controlling the tendons and ligaments of an expert on that level is hard enough without you making it even more difficult on yourself. Replace her armor with some light cloth to cover decency. Then practicing should become easier. Understanding, Ryu put Ailsa's words into action, removing Amaris' armor and clothing her in one of his black robes. Seeing that they were a bit tall for her, he cut around the bottom edges so that the black fabric covered a portion of her calves. Then he began to practice once more. He immediately felt the effects of Ailsa's advice. Without so much weight on her body, Amaris herself only clocked in at about 60 jin. This gave Ryu a much large margin of error, because it was now much easier to center her gravity. Refinement necromancers needed as deep an understanding of the human body as healers did. Even if one refined a corpse down to its bones, it was necessary to use principles of the human body's musculoskeletal system in order to efficiently control your undead. Of course, if your corpse puppet wasn't human, you'd have to come to understand that species, whatever it might be, as well. To control Amaris, Ryu had to learn to use the tendons and ligaments of her body like the pulleys of a complex system. But this was only the beginning. Control of tendons and ligaments were for fine motor control, but controlling them alone couldn't bring out the full strength of a corpse puppet. In order to do that, one would need to learn to activate large muscle systems, blood vessels, and meridians. Ryu was struggling with just the first part. Who knew when he could use them in battle? Luckily, as an herbologist, Ryu had a deep understanding of the human body, as he needed to be very familiar with it to understand how certain herbs react when ingested. So he skipped over a major step, but there was much fine-tuning still to be done. Every human had little quirks that made them different. Amaris' body was different from thousandth's not only because she was a woman, but also because she was her own person. It was up to a skilled necromancer to understand how to bring out the full potential of their corpse puppet. Amaris' path focuses on speed and agility, but thousandth's body is very weak. It seems he was a mental realm master. Ailsa nodded. It's unfortunate. Amaris likely believed that since she was a woman, speed and agility was her only path. But the reality is that she had a very unique structure suitable for strength and power. Because of that, it would probably be easier if you tried to learn to control thousandth first. Or better yet, one of the spiritual severing realm experts. The greater one's cultivation, the stronger their bodies even if they don't focus on the body realm. And the stronger a corpse's body, the harder it is to learn to manipulate. Is there no way to bring out thousandth's best talent? Ailsa shook her head. In order to use his mental realm's talent and abilities, you'd have to be a soul necromancer. Unfortunately, by the time you gained an appropriate legacy, his soul would have long since dispersed. In fact, it already has. Plus, even if it hadn't, he hasn't entered the soul birth realm yet. Ryu nodded. This meant that Amaris would be his only puppet truly capable of fighting against peak divine vessel experts. Dallance was weaker by comparison, so higher divine vessel realm experts was likely his limit, maybe middle. Of course, this was due to Hecate's unique refinement procedures. Usually, after refinement into a corpse puppet, one would gain an undead with only about 70% of their true strength at best. But Hecate's eccentric method allowed for a 90% translation of strength. If Ryu refined Dallance's corpse to make him sturdier, he'd be able to exert the strength of a peak divine vessel realm expert in due time. You're also being too stubborn, Ailsa said reprimandingly. The true benefit of Hecate's refinement method is in leaving corpse puppets with simple wills of their own. You should be able to control them by giving them simple one-word commands instead of controlling them down to their finest muscle fibers. Ryu shook his head. I'll use simple, one-word commands for the weaker ones, but for my strongest puppets, I need to control their actions to the finest detail, because in all likelihood, if I have to bring them out, my back will be against the wall. Though difficult, the world of necromancy was slowly intriguing Ryu. He hadn't even fully delved into the true meat of this fantastical world. Aside from the three main branches, there were countless other reputable ideologies that fell under their umbrella, such as Lich Commanders, Lich Refiners, and even the mysterious Shadow Necromancers. But for now, Ryu kept his mind on this singular task, slowly letting the weeks float away as he refined his control. After more than 2 months, Ryu finally left the Death Worm Immortal Cave, heading for the Inner Ring. His mind was filled with thoughts of finding resources to get the Immortal Cave back in working shape. All the while, Dallance's treasure became a faint afterthought, oblivious to the chaos he had caused. After another month of travel, Ryu had made his way to the Inner Ring. Luckily, thanks to Ailsa's help, he wouldn't have to travel a month once more to get back to the Death Worm Immortal Cave, which was now currently resting in a corner of the incubator. It wasn't long before Ryu found his way to a bustling city. The map Granny Miriam gave him didn't have any details about the Inner Ring, but luckily, he managed to find multiple maps within the spatial rings of the adventurers. After all, how could they be adventurers without such a thing? Though it was good news that he found a city so easily, this city unfortunately wasn't as convenient to enter as Valor City had been. While the latter only asked for a fee, this city seemed to have quite a complicated process, or else the line wouldn't stretch for several hundred meters like it was now. Ryu sighed. His life was really too different now. A scion of the Tatsuya clan, waiting in line like a commoner. He couldn't help but smile bitterly as he obediently followed procedures. I'm no longer a scion. I need to remember this lest I cause myself problems in the future. Hearing these thoughts of her life partner, Ailsa giggled and shook her head. She knew that if push came to shove, Ryu would toss these words to the back of his mind without regard. The immortal Kai stones you have should be able to power the death worm for some time. What's most necessary now is finding tools for fixing up its mechanisms. Most immortal caves have self-healing formations in place, so we just need a method to stimulate them. Ailsa explained. Ryu raised an eyebrow. How long could just 3 inferior immortal Kai stones power such a large structure for? Immortal caves focused on sustainability, so they're usually quite efficient. Hecate's immortal cave is also able to gather up energy for itself. It just needs Kai stones to catalyze the reaction. I see. Immortal caves were mostly used by experts who lived their lives in seclusion. Though the Tatsuya clan had a view, it had to be known that the primary function of immortal caves was to act as homes. Some only had movement as a secondary ability, so there were much more convenient treasures for travel, which was why Ryu didn't have much experience with them. The daily entrance cap of our looming city has almost been reached. Only 10 more individuals will be allowed in. The rest of you, please find separate accommodations. The guards manning the city gates spoke in a booming voice, causing many to be dejected. Still, they didn't dare to raise a fuss as the line slowly dispersed. Unlike the Valor Guards, the looming guards were much greater level experts, each being of the spiritual severing realm at a minimum. Quickly counting his place, Ryu sighed a breath of relief. After waiting for hours from dawn to now, he was currently in 6th place. It wouldn't be much longer before he could enter. Soon it was Ryu's turn. Name. The guard's eyes sharpened at Ryu's appearance. He didn't seem to be any older than 18, but his Kai density matched his own. Any tiredness he had for the previous proceeding seemingly vanished. Ryu, last name, the guard pressed. Ryu inwardly grit his teeth. He felt a deep shame in his heart, one that suffocated him to the point he was unable to breathe. But remembering Ailsa's warning, he forced himself to push that feeling down. I have none, he answered coldly. Ailsa's usually happy expression grew somber, knowing how hard this moment was for her little Ryu. But she could only silently support him, knowing that this was for the best. The guard stood in shock. It wasn't rare to find those without surnames. In fact, such people were everywhere. Inherited names held power, which was why only those who had established respectable clans could pass on their names, the minimum requirement being a first-order clan. Commoners had given names, but no surnames. Seeing Ryu's talent and reaction to his question, the guard's eyes shifted with a bit of pity. No need to dwell on such useless things, young man. You're very talented. You'll definitely have your own inherited name one day. State your purpose, please. I have come to seek the treasures of the looming city auction house. The guard nodded. Final question, how long will your stay be? Is there a limit? Ryu wondered. There is none, but there is a difference in fee depending on your answer. Those who have come seeking permanent residence must have a cultivation or talent of a certain caliber. As for those staying for various amounts of time, the entrance fee is 100 gold, which can last you 3 days. After 3 days, the price becomes 1 inferior mortal Kai stone a day. Ryu nodded. I would like to stay for 1 month. There's a discount in this case for those who buy their time in bulk. Just 10 inferior mortal Kai sto. At that moment, a rushing wind whipped across the plain outside of Looming City. Subconsciously, everyone looked up to see a speeding carriage hovering in the sky without wheels, pulled along by strong 4th-order wind falcons. The carriage was a beautiful pristine white, completely unblemished. If one looked closely, it was possible to see 3 heart-pounding beauties seated within, each with varying temperaments. Soon, the carriage flew over what remained of the dispersing line and entered the city. The guard looked toward the 5 remaining individuals with an awkward expression. I'm sorry, it seems we'll have to cut the remaining quota down. Since 4 entered, 3 women and 1 driver, this young man will have to be the final allowed guest. Dejected, the 4 individuals behind, Ryu felt their faces redden with rage, but in the end, they could only swallow their hatred and bow their heads. Ryu sighed a breath of relief once more, taking out 10 Kai stones and handing them over. Beautiful fairies, wait. Allow this young master to treat you to dinner. Ryu's eyes sharpened. He looked over his shoulder to see another streaking carriage, this time pulled by a crimson horse galloping in the air, a 4th-order bloodied steed. Rage he had pressed down came bubbling upward. He just spent 3/4 of his day doing nothing but waiting in line. Then he suffered the worst humiliation of his life, claiming that he had no inherited name. He would rather die than lower his head again in such quick succession. A glaive reflecting a beautiful violet light appeared in his hand. Young man, don't act rashly. I can still help. Why? It was already too late. Ryu's arm flexed and his glaive lashed out, shooting out a stream of Kai that held his tempered down feelings. In an instant, the driver was shocked silly as the reins in his hands and harness were perfectly sliced in half. Losing the support of the crimson horse, the carriage crashed down from the skies under the shocked gazes of the spectators. It skidded several hundred meters, only barely stopping before the city gates. Having given the looming guard his Kai stones, Ryu took his identification plaque and walked into the city without looking back, his expression fuming. Who dares? A booming voice erupted from the carriage, followed by its quick destruction. An enraged cultivator shattered the vessel into a rain of splintered wood and bent metal, his disheveled figure shooting into the skies while his reddened eyes scanned the culprits below. If one looked closely, it was easy to tell that his image had once been elegant, but the tumble from the skies had definitely destroyed whatever semblance of that essence he once had. Though he was a great expert, clearly seen by his ability to fly, the change had been too sudden. Before he realized what happened, his carriage was tumbling from the skies. Just a moment ago, he was chasing beauties, but now he had embarrassed himself to this extent. "You damned driver!" The young man's hand stretched outward, sending a surge of chi forward that pulled the poor driver's neck into his hand. "Young Master Bastille, please." The driver struggled, his legs dangling from below. "Someone cut the reins and harness. It truly wasn't my fault." "Someone what?" The young man surnamed Bastille suddenly calmed. If what his driver was saying was true, this might mean that someone equal to him in stature had taken action. After all, who else would dare to act against him if not such a person? Just a few moments ago, he had been calling out to a carriage carrying 3 young ladies. Considering their beauty and the prestige of their clans, he obviously had many competitors that might be unhappy toward his pursuit. His thoughts only seemed more validated by the fact this person didn't attack him directly. Whoever could precisely cut the reins and harness of a carriage moving at such speeds was a great expert. Yet they hadn't taken advantage of the moment to harm him. This was in line with the actions those clan scions would take. Though they fought amongst each other quite frequently, they never went overboard, and most definitely didn't attempt to kill one another. That said, embarrassing him like this was well in line with their usual actions, causing his expression to grow solemn. "Which young master has acted against me today? Will you continue to hide?" Young Master Bastille looked toward the ground below, scanning the area to see who might have done it. But all he found were awkward expressions that tried to avoid his gaze. The longer the perpetrator remained silent, the angrier the blood boiling his veins became. "Why, young master?" I. The driver tried to speak, but having been cut off from his air circulation for so long, he directly passed out, unable to stand it any longer. "HM." Young Master Bastille released his grip and shook the driver awake. "Young master, it wasn't one of them who did this." The frown on the young master's face deepened. I couldn't see clearly, but it was definitely someone waiting in line who took action against young master. "Someone of your stature would end." The driver cut off his next words, remaining silent. His next words were clear. No one of young Master Bastille's stature would ever wait in line to enter the city. Young masters like him, and the girls that entered before him, entered and exited as they pleased. In fact, they didn't care for the population cap at all. It wasn't rare to see one of them entering the city after the daily counts were finished, only for some pitiful soul who had waited in line all day to be kicked out. Unfortunately, for a city as large as Looming City, it had to be strictly controlled. If too many people were allowed to enter, it would lessen the prestige of the city and also lessen the enjoyment of visiting it. While normal people had to factor this into their actions, these scions hardly cared. Young Master Bastille turned his gaze to the looming guard, who stood at the gates with an awkward expression. "Is what he said true?" Replying to young Master Bastille, "This is true." The guard cleared his throat. Young Master Bastille's gaze turned toward the back of a man, walking further and further into the depths of the city. Ryu hadn't even attempted to run after his actions. In fact, his gait was steady as could be as he walked forward without a care for those at his back. Seeing this, young Master Bastille, who had been curious about who dared to attack him in this way without having status, felt his rage bubble back up. To so blatantly disrespect him, yet not even run for your life. The level of arrogance more than rubbed him the wrong way. "What is his name?" I'm sure he was forced to leave it. The guard wasn't meant to reveal such information so freely, or everyone would look down on their looming city. But seeing his gaze, he had no choice. "His name is Ryu." Young Master Bastille frowned. For some reason, at that moment, he remembered his younger brother speaking to him about a man he met during his herbology exam. That young man called himself Ryu Tatsuya. Could it be? His last name, the young master pressed. He had none. None. The young master's eyes sharpened. There were too many people in the world. Of course, many would share the same first name. Plus, there was no way someone with such a powerful last name would ever forsake his inherited name by saying he didn't have one. Doing so was nothing less than slapping the face of your ancestors. You nameless bastard. Stop right there. Young Master Bastial's voice boomed. Hearing these words, Ryu's steps paused. His back stood tall like an ancient statue. For a long while, he didn't say a single word. It was as though he was letting the words he just heard to seep into his very being. However, as time passed, the pressure around him seemed to grow explosively. The air became heavy, the wind surging around him sharpening with each passing moment. A baleful aura spiraled around his body. It seemed that someone wanted to die. Ryu's black-cloaked figure stood frozen, standing on the main road of entry to the core of looming city. The number of individuals around him wasn't countless, but it was most definitely quite a few. The wind began to respond to Ryu's emotion, or seemingly lack thereof. It whipped around violently, listening to the hums of his northern heavenly wind. Ailsa remained silent. There was only so much she could ask of Ryu. At this point in his life, she knew him better than anyone. She could see his thoughts, his struggles, his hopes, his dreams. Every day, Ryu would cultivate as though he would die the next. He didn't rest. He didn't do things for enjoyment. He hadn't even attempted to forge relationships. Though Ailsa knew all of these things to be unhealthy, what could she do? Could she tell Ryu, while the fate of his family was unknown, to take it easy, to relax a little bit? No matter how often such words were on the tip of her tongue, she could never manage to force them out. Today was the first time she ever received a true concession from Ryu. In truth, she didn't even count his choice to call her big sister among such a list, purely because she understood that he had taken a step back only so that she would be more capable of helping him in the future. But Ryu forsaking his own name was something far beyond that. These were all things Ailsa understood, but she buried them deep within her heart. The Ryu of now couldn't keep going like this. He couldn't live and breathe to cultivate. He couldn't exist purely for the sake of revenge. He couldn't make any and everything his enemy. Yet this was the headspace he was in currently, and it was something Ailsa had no real idea how to fix. So, what would happen when Ryu was suddenly disrespected in such a blatant fashion? When a pain he tried to keep hidden away within the depths of his soul was drudged up by a foolish young master? Ryu's head slowly turned back, his eyes radiating an endless frost. A chilly wind seemed to want to freeze everything in the path of his gaze, as his eyes landed on the bestial young master in the skies. The young master shivered before quickly regaining control of his body. There was something deeply unsettling about Ryu's gaze. It felt as though the whole weight of the world was crashing down upon him. In truth, Ryu was wearing a mask, the very same black half-mask he gained from Hecate. The looming city guard didn't ask Ryu to remove it because all he needed was Ryu's Kai signature to complete the registration process. With Ryu's Kai signature, as long as he committed a crime, finding him would be incredibly easy. Unfortunately, the guard had no way of knowing that Ryu could use multiple kiss at will. He used Grave Kai to complete his registration, but his true Kai signature was written in neutral Kai. Ryu wouldn't be so foolish to hand these individuals his everything. So when he turned his gaze back toward the man in the sky, his heart beat with thoughts of murder. A deep rage was welling up inside him, crawling its way up his body and clawing at his throat, trying to find a way out. Ailsa's expression changed. He shouldn't have to deal with this so soon. His strongest current bloodline is his lightning-killing bloodline. So why is the rage fire of his fire dragon bloodline burning so strongly? Ailsa's visage changed once more, suddenly understanding. Ryu had just claimed he was nameless, but both he and Ailsa knew that this was not the case at all. Though Ryu understood that he had to do this for his own safety, and Ailsa pressed him, there was one thing they both of them hadn't factored in. How would the fire dragon within Ryu react to knowing its host had forsaken it? Tatsuya. It wasn't just any name. It was the title of the mighty ancient fire dragon, and Ryu had just woken a slumbering beast by slapping it across the snout. Or rather, this young master had. In that instant, the stones beneath Ryu's feet shattered. The once cold breeze immediately became a scalding hot, as Ryu's silver pupils became a scarlet red. Those in the surroundings backed away. Despite many of them being strong cultivators themselves, they found it hard to be near Ryu. It was almost as though they'd be burnt to ashes if they approached too closely. Ailsa sighed. "Little Ryu, you cannot kill him. No matter what, you cannot kill him." Her words received no response. Veins bulged across Ryu's skin, but though their color should have been a vile blue-green, they actually pulsed with a vitality-filled red gold as though molten lava was coursing within his body. The young master faltered in the skies. He had thought he had regained control of his body, but he suddenly began to sweat profusely. His once luxurious robes began to appear as though they had spent hours in the rain, his black hair sticking to the sides of his face. Ryu looked down at his body. His sudden action was akin to abruptly releasing a tightly held rope. Before the young master could react, he fell from the skies. Unable to recollect himself in time, he crash-landed right beside his carriage and atop his driver in a pitiful manner. "This is my body. This is my blood. I act as I please, not as you dictate. Now, silence." Ryu directed his rage at the blood within his body. Ryu's boiling blood suddenly came to a grinding halt. Maybe if this was anyone else, it would have been the end of it. The young master had humiliated himself. Ryu had regained control of his body. It should be finished, correct. Unfortunately, Ailsa's sigh told a completely different story. Ryu's body flashed, appearing outside the city walls and above the young master's body in an instant. He dove down, his foot squarely hitting the young man in the jaw, sending him flying in the opposite direction of the city. As he was still whipping through the air, Ryu's fist descended downward, pummeling him into the ground. "Say it again." Ryu's voice boomed, a murderous coldness hidden within. His fists rained down, deepening the crater again and again, as pent-up rage bubbled forth like an endless tide. It was as though he didn't notice the quickly accumulating crowd or the rushing looming guards. "I said say it again." Ryu's rage was like a tempest that swirled into the clouds above. Each strike was akin to reverberating earthquake, shaking the very foundation of looming city, despite his actions taking place outside its walls. Young Master Bastille felt that his body had becoming nothing but mush. His bones cracked, his inner organs were jarred, and his eyes grew too swollen to see much of anything. Ailsa rubbed her temples, sitting upon Ryu's shoulder. It seemed that no matter how jarring his movement, she didn't budge a single inch. How can a master of the Tatsuya saintly weapons and an expert bowman suddenly forget how to use anything but his fists when he loses his temper? Whatever, maybe it's better this way. If he really did use his best, this fool would have already died 10 times over. What was he thinking, calling Ryu a bastard? Of the women in the world, he only cares for 5. His wife, his big sister, his grandmothers, and his mother. Idiot. In the distance, the carriage adorned by pristine white came to an abrupt pause. Where did that annoying brute go? One of the 3 beautiful, with a head of cascading brunette hair, asked. "Don't tell me you like that man, Ria." Another with blonde hair responded. "Don't be ridiculous. It's just convenient that I don't have to carry my purse around when he's here. Plus, I was feeling hungry, yet we're almost at our favorite restaurant and he hasn't caught up yet." The ground seems to be shaking. The third quiet beauty suddenly spoke, looking at the sea of people below. It was very clear that they were all headed toward the same direction. Could something big have happened? That might also explain why that gorilla hadn't made his way here yet. It didn't take the 3 beauties very long to decide to follow the crowd. They had only come to Looming City for some fun, anyway. Though there was a big event coming up, they were definitely very early. And anyone who knew why Looming City was known as the entertainment capital of the inner ring understood exactly why this was as well. Still, despite knowing they'd find entertainment when they made their way to this city, never did they expect the spectacle before them. Theron Bastille first-in-line heir of the Bastille clan, was being beaten black and blue, without even a hope of fighting back against an unknown masked man. The first beauty who wondered where Thayron had gone, heir, suddenly erupted into a fit of giggles. Serves him right. I don't know who that young man is, but he's going to be in a lot of trouble very soon. The calmest of the three spoke again. Tay, don't be such a downer. Who cares what happens to him? Just enjoy the show. Who knows, maybe he has some mysterious backer we're not aware of. The blonde beauty responded. Unlikely, Tay said calmly. He wears a necromancer half-mask, but there are no strong necromancer powers on the pedestal plane. How likely could it be that a blossom plane genius would come here? The blonde pouted, feeling that Tay was correct. Don't pout, Mao. You should have known better than to question Sister Tay's deductions in the first place. Heir teased. Mao, who had just been pouting, suddenly froze. He's a higher spiritual severing expert. How is that possible? Something doesn't seem right. No matter what, Thayron is a half-step into the divine vessel realm. There's no way he'd lose to someone 2 steps below him. Tay and Heir frowned at these words. In fact, Heir thought that Mao might have made another mistake that Tay would soon correct. But who knew that even her senses would find it hard to refute this? I'm afraid it's even more unbelievable than that, Tay said with a solemn expression. He isn't a higher spiritual severing realm expert. He's a peak Kai refinement realm expert. It's just that his Kai density is the equivalent of someone on that stage. Suddenly, Tay wasn't so confident in the idea that this necromancer wasn't from the Blossom Plane. She had mingled with the geniuses of the core region before. There was no way they could birth such a genius. It was impossible for them. In later cultivation stages, it's easier to tell realms apart because they're separated by comprehension. No one would ever mistake someone of the Tao pedestal realm for some of the world's sea realm. However, it's more difficult in early stages because everything is so Kai-centric. Still, there are some key differences to pick apart. Those of the spiritual severing realm not only have thicker Kai, but also their Kai also has a subtle sharpness gained after forming their Kai blades. This man doesn't have this sharpness. The moment she finished speaking, Ryu gripped Thayron's throat before standing to his full height. You really won't say it again, he practically growled. Then get on your knees and apologize. His arm swung downward once more, except this time, Thayron was in his hand. He buried the young master knee first, before slamming his head into the dry dirt below. At that moment, the shifting feet of dozens of moving guards became very clear. The crowd of citizens split like the Red Sea, unwilling to get involved, but very eager to watch on. Everyone knew how dangerous the looming guards were. The only thing that could make them lower their swords were the young masters of the inner ring, but that was simultaneously one of the best reasons for them to raise them as well. Everyone knew that of the 5 core clan of their inner ring, the Bastille clan was definitely the most overbearing, in large part to their special earth affinity blood. In all likelihood, this wouldn't end well. This young man was lucky that Looming City was under the control of the Zhu clan, and not the Bastille clan, or else he would have no hope of escaping. Halt, necromancer. You've violated at least 9 articles of our city's code. You are under arrest. A captain of the guard stopped the 24 or so looming guards in their tracks, his eyes narrowing, clear disdain creeping through his features. Unfortunately, Mental Realm Master hated necromancers because they survived their era of ostracization, despite technically being Mental Realm Masters as well. During Ryu's first life, Mental Realm cultivation was more than just taboo, it was practically banned. It was to the point where even the heir of the Wind Shrine, Gale, despite having the 7th ranked heavenly pupils which greatly boosted one's mental realm ability, still had to be cautious despite his background. Yet during this time, necromancers didn't face the same banishment. It was no wonder Mental Realm Masters felt unresigned. After all, no matter which branch of necromancy you practiced, what was most important was your mental realm. But somehow, necromancers thrived during this and the last era, while mental realm masters became cockroaches pulling themselves back up by their own efforts. Of course, this was simply a one-sided perspective. Human beings had a habit of seeing the flaws in others without doing any self-reflection. Could it be that the shrine plane was truly biased? No. One had to remember the death shrine had long been lost. In fact, even to now, no one but Ryu and his immediate family knew where it was and how to find it. Why was this important? The answer was simple. During Ryu's era, the strength of a clan was directly correlated to the shrines it possessed and its saints and saintesses. Meaning, if a clan didn't control a shrine, they wouldn't be considered among the top echelon of society. Simply put, the necromancers weren't considered to be among the topmost portion of the shrine realm. Yet they lived well, while mental realm masters went into hiding. Obviously, there was a massive difference between the two if they were separated in this way. To find the answer, one only needs to think back to the legends of the higher mortal plane. The very reason why Ryu, as a mere newborn, was subjected to such harsh treatment for nothing but the color of his hair and eyes. Though necromancers were seen in a poor light by laymen because of their dealings with death, they were ironically quite respectful of life. The Necromancy Guild has strict rules and protocols attached to the accumulation of undead, and took a hands-off approach when it came to clans or sects seeking revenge against their members, should the facts not be in their favor. This approach earned the respect of the martial world. However, mental realm masters, they had no such honor. They treated lives like weeds, manipulated the emotions of innocence, and saw themselves as above everything. Some of the most vicious acts in history were committed by these individuals. That wasn't to say that all mental realm masters were bad. No group of individuals could be described in such simple terms. However, their reputation wasn't completely undeserved. Every era was characterized by one calamity. In order to be categorized as such, a calamity must impact every plane and implicate the lives of trillions. The Shrine Realm was currently in its 10th era, meaning it had experienced 9 calamities. Of these calamities, mental realm masters were responsible for 6 of them. Even if it was fine for someone unrelated to these calamities to feel unwilling, if they turned some of that animosity toward their own people, many of these problems could be fixed. Unfortunately, mental realm masters were often far too arrogant. Because of their specialty, they produced the best secondary profession geniuses. Imagine a single group of people birthing the best alchemists, the best formation masters, the best ruin masters, the best herbologists, and the list goes on. Wouldn't they control practically all of the wealth of a realm? It was no wonder they continuously grew more and more arrogant as time went on. Of course, Ryu understood all of this, so when he saw the looming guard captain's demeanor, he was very much aware of what might happen. In the distance, the Crimson Fourth Order bloodied steed charged back for its owner. The situation had changed so abruptly that it hadn't even had a chance to react until now. Considering Fourth Order beasts could already have human-like thoughts of their own, with those of the Fifth Order being no less intelligent than humans, it was no wonder the beast was displaying signs of emotions. Ryu's foot buried Theron's head into the ground, as his gaze ignored the captain to land upon the galloping, bloodied steed. Heel, Ryu's 2 fingers pierced outward, slicing a fraction of an inch into the steed's forehead. Though it was imperceptible, some more astute individuals caught the faint hint of lightning that coated his fingers. A necromancer using lightning. What the hell was going on? Everyone knew how incompatible lightning was with death. Only a fool would dual cultivate both. Suddenly, the Crimson Horse became docile. In an instant, its master-servant contract had been shattered by Ryu's spiritual kai. "You're quite decent. I'll be taking you." The bloodied steed neighed, hot steam blowing from its nostrils. In that moment, the Crimson Steed, known for its hot temper, actually began to lick Ryu's hand. Without its master-servant contract driving it, Ryu's ice jade crystal body shone through. Ryu's anger dissipated. To think this fool used such a good beast to pull a carriage. When Ailsaw explained to him how valuable this steed could be to him, his rage was replaced with a faint excitement, allowing him to calm down. His thoughts of slaughtering all of these looming guards disappeared. I've violated at least 9 articles. Have I or have I not? Shouldn't a guard captain be more precise? Captain Zhu, who had already been losing his patience, suddenly felt his temper spike once more. Let's say I accept that I've violated 9. Do you mind telling me which 9? It can't be that the great looming city arrests visitors handling personal matters outside their city walls without even stating their reasons, right? We wouldn't want people to start looking down on you, now would we? Captain Zhu's face turned red as he forgot to breathe in his anger. He really had just arbitrarily thrown the number out, planning to make up the 9 charges after throwing Ryu into jail. So how could he have an answer? To make matters worse, Ryu had emphasized that he was outside the city walls, which was true. Attack. It seemed the captain wasn't much of a wordsmith. Ryu's expression didn't change as 20 or so silver-armored guards charged toward him. He casually leapt onto the bloodied steed's back. Standing at just over 3 meters tall, it was a magnificent beast. Just sitting upon it, Ryu felt his blood boil as though he was charging through a battlefield. Having recollected himself from anger, Ryu knew it wasn't in his best interest to connect his identities. Before, when he used his glaive, it was too quick for others to notice, at least not the individuals that were there anyway. Their prowess was too far below his own. Most only saw a flash and didn't register that he even held a weapon. Seeing through his own mistake, Ryu wouldn't make the same error again. Since he was currently Ryu the Necromancer, he would be exactly that. In an instant, 34th Order corpse puppets appeared before Ryu, each exuding the aura of a spiritual severing expert. Like the commander of a battlefield, Ryu sat upon the bloodied steed's back, his expression calm but dark, trying to suppress a necromancer with numbers. How funny. The guards hesitated in their charge. Even their captain, who hadn't followed them, felt his heart seize. He had rashly ordered the attack, not thinking everything through beforehand. But even still, this young man's words made his lips twitch. Did he think having so many 4th Order corpses at his realm was normal? At most, necromancers of his age and prowess might have 5 or 6. Ryu truly didn't know this. In fact, he couldn't control so many corpse puppets at once. It was only thanks to Hekate's special refinement method that he was able to do this. The corpses maintained a faint will of their own, allowing them to follow simple commands. Currently, Ryu could barely control a single corpse puppet, and not very well at that. Ryu knew that his skills in necromancy were lacking, because he was controlling the corpses with simple one-word commands like attack and defend. Their prowess was half what it could be. However, he had his own methods to make up for this. Captain Zhu looked on toward the black-cloaked corpses. None moved a single inch. He could tell by the black fog hovering before their faces that Ryu had taken steps to hide their identities, a sign of respect for the clans they might be from. Though this seemed like a simple technique, Captain Zhu was well aware that no necromancy clans on this plane had access to such a technique. To be able to block his senses as a peak spiritual severing realm expert, it seemed he had really smashed his foot against an iron plate today. 2 beautiful daggers with a black finish and blue crystalline edges appeared in Ryu's hands. Whenever he used treasures he received that night, he couldn't help but see Elena's face, her beautiful soft lips, the devious and playful light in her pink diamond eyes, the gentle feeling of her touch. The woman who cared so much for him, the one he owed too much to. He felt his mood sway, feeling as though the rage he had forgotten was building back up again. His eyes closed. I just need to make it to the soul birth realm. Then I'll know if she's okay. Then I'll know where to go to see her again. Wait for me, Elena. I'm already in the spiritual endowment stage. Only one more step left. By the time he opened his eyes once more, the 2 sides were almost about to clash. Steady, Ryu spoke his command. The corpse puppets shifted like a well-oiled machine, spears appearing in their hands as they sank into solid, wide-footed stances. He can control them all so fluidly. Tay felt shaky. All of her intelligence had taken a massive blow. There was nothing in this world Ryu was more familiar with than the basic stances. So what if he could only control the corpses with simple one-word commands. Even if others would only be able to bring out half of their original power, he could make them stronger than they were when they were alive. His eyes still closed, he felt the battlefield spread out in his mind. It was no longer the foggy images of before. They were crisp and clean. His spiritual sense could stretch out for 20 kilometers. Though this wasn't enough to cover a city as large as Looming City, it was more than enough to cover a battlefield that spanned only 50 or so meters. Pierce. Images of Ryu's perfect Pierce flooded the minds of the corpse puppets. Since they had wills of their own, they could obviously be influenced by Ryu's own will. His comprehension was so deep that it came to him as easy as breathing. Tay trembled as the two sides clashed. They say that necromancers must be experts in all sorts of fighting methods, so that they can tailor their commands with the optimal fighting style. There are some exceptionally skilled necromancers who seek out corpses who have already trained in their preferred style, creating an army tailored to their strength. He's 5 undead pierced outward with flawless precision. Ryu had arranged them into 3 groups of 10, lining them up in rows of 5. The first squad stood at the vanguard, while the remaining 2 were separated about 2 meters from their back line, flanking their right and left. This was a basic formation Ryu remembered seeing a tactics book in Shrine Library. He never cared for such things, but thanks to his origin flame, he remembered it with absolute clarity. 5 strikes were sent, and 5 arcs of blood were drawn into the air. Though Ryu didn't kill them, 5 guards fell unable to battle. Retreat. Sidestep, steady. Sidestep, lunge, sweep. Sweep. Ryu had casually made their weapons of a fairly sturdy 100-year oak tree. The result were a set of weapons barely at the common grade. Yet the results were actually so devastating. From start to finish, no one but the foremost front 5 attacked, yet the entire squadron of guards fell in agony, gripping their injuries, completely unable to battle. You actually attempted to murder Looming City guards. Captain Zhu erupted. Ryu didn't even bother to answer. Even those around looked toward the captain with disgust. If Ryu wanted them dead, how could they be alive? It was then that a sudden laughter could be heard from the distance, the power of which the current Ryu could not ignore.